Gilly, so small, her red hair still braided as if she hadn't changed one bit. Beside her, Lyra and Breck were dressed in the uniforms of Zendera. Otherwise, they looked the same. Lyra like a regal bird. Breck a warrior who could tear down any enemy without so much as breaking a sweat.
More like brecking a sweat.
Breaking a sweat. All three of them watched Nor with that blade held out as if they were staring at a god star come down from the heavens.
Who is your queen?
Nor asked the girls. You are, they said in unison. Andy pressed a hand to her mouth, covering her gasp. No, she said. They would never bow to her. The compulsion is strong, Claren explained. Dex's heart thumped against his ribs. A coldness moved through him as he stared at the blade in Nor's hand.
This is your first warning, Androma,
Nor said, turning to look at the camera again, rouged lips curved in a feral smile.
Come unarmed to my estate in 3 days' time, or another will fall.
Another? Dex asked, confused. It happened so quickly. Nor lifted the blade, turning her back to the camera as she swung towards the girl kneeling on the right. No! Andy shouted. That's all. Welcome back to another episode of the SBU English Club Podcast. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Jay.
And I don't have an opening bit for this one because at time of recording, I still don't know how I feel about the book that we received for our club meeting today. We read Nexus, which is the sequel to Zenith by Sasha Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings. I always get them confused with each other. They thought that we did a good job with Zenith and wanted us to check out the sequel to their book.
I also don't know how I feel about this, and I think this book might be good. And I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. There are so many contradictions. This is, bar none, the best time I've had reading an English Club Podcast book. This is a very damn good sequel in that it made me want to reread Zenith to see if I could piece everything together from the get-go, which, if you remember the Nightbane episode, Nightbane made me recommend never reading Lightlark, so that's already an improvement. But numerically, in terms of quantity, I have the most bad things to say about this book, and I love it so much. I was thrilled, I was annoyed, I was inspired, I was pissed off. I experienced the full range of the human spectrum of emotions, and if you can't tell from this intro, I am I've never been on footing this shifty when it comes to my opinions about a book. I think we're going to spend a lot of our time just trying to go over whether or not the things that we liked about this book are actually good, or we've just been beaten into a pulp by English Club Podcast books that we don't know what good is anymore.
I feel like you're going to see our opinions forming in real time, even more so than you usually do.
Right.
Because I think both of us are coming into this tentative and unsure of what the good things about this book mean, because while it delivers on a lot of what it does deliver is not stuff that was set up in the first book. It's it just does a whole bunch of new cool things that are cool, but do they work for a sequel? I don't know.
Right. But then it does pick up here and there threads from the first novel, and it does develop them. And I'm like, wow, okay, in context, that really does change my opinions about certain chapters in Zenith. So I don't know. This might be a complete mess. I'm sorry in advance, but we're going to do what we can here because there's a lot to unpack. I'll recommend, but I won't require that you have participated in our meeting about Zenith. I'll give you the recaps and we'll explain things in context, both the book and this episode. We'll make sure nothing completely comes out of nowhere if you're not familiar with Zenith, but it'll be interesting. I want you guys to tell me whether or not you think this book is actually good based on what we're telling you, because again, it's almost like there's a satellite in the galaxy that broadcasts thoughts that are making me think a certain way. And now I'm like thinking back and I'm like, were those my thoughts or were they implanted in me by a giant psychic satellite?
That's kind of funny because I was thinking it was sort of like I had been shot by some kind of enchanted bullet, and now my veins were glowing silver with the thrill of being able to have this meeting with you, Andrew. And it almost feels like those thoughts are coming from elsewhere, perhaps even the satellite that you mentioned, and it might even be the case that I'm full of ghosts right now, and the reason that I love this book is because the ghosts actually love this book.
Love this book. Oh my god. So we will find out. Hope you guys enjoy. Just in case this is your first time hanging out with us, I wanted to introduce ourselves. We are the SBU English Club Podcast. We are the best critique group that no one asked for, and our mission is to take books that the internet has written off as bad or cringe and see the good in them and try to meet them on their terms and build them up in terms of their vision.
Speaking of the way that this book fits into our mission statement, I think this might be like the most written off by the internet book that we've ever talked about.
Yes.
In that, like, the first one did make the rounds on like the bad books internet space, but then the sequel just kind of released to no fanfare or hatred whatsoever.
Right.
So it was kind of like people voted it out of existence with their wallets a little bit, which I think means that it is the most deserving of a shot here on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Speaking of Lightlark and Nightbane, it's weird that this book, which predates both of those, also has a twist that involves there being a gateway to another dimension full of unspecified ghost-like beings that in some way want to contact or enter the main or default universe of the series. I don't know what is going on in like a Jungian sense in the collective unconscious over in like the book talk author space, but you guys need to check in on that. What are you doing over there?
Yeah, did it like happen in ACOTAR or something? I have no idea like what would create this in the zeitgeist, or like is it an AO3 premise?
Did everybody play Persona 4 in the same weekend and then they just took different amounts of time to digest that? Like, I really don't know.
But thanks for hanging out. Just before we get started with our summary, I did want to thank our supporters. The Order of the Orb Foxes, SBU certified person who can read Dreekolith, Foolish Bird owner Aiden Feltkamp, Pink Catsy, a BookTube expert, and Simply FJ, one of my favorite Instagram followers. Second, of course, only to Lanny Sarum. We are also supported by Navari, Natalia, Hobby Moth, and most recently, Mallard Griff. Additionally, we are also supported by anyone watching this on YouTube. So now that we're monetized, this list includes you. I also wanted to thank anyone who supports us beyond the financial side of things by subscribing, following, rating, whatever they call it on the specific platform you're on, as well as those who recommend us to friends. I wanted to give a special shout out to Avril Marie Alland, no relation to Nova's Playlist, founder of bookish apparel label Plot Bunny Hollow, who recommended us on her awesome blog, and I just now noticed it this morning when I was getting caught up on her blog posts. That just like absolutely floored me, and I was really touched to see SBU mentioned amongst a bunch of way more respectable names in this space. Like, that was kind of harrowing to me. So definitely check her out.
Yeah, thank you everybody who supports us, no matter how you do it, even if it's giving us just a listen right now. We really appreciate it. We could not be here without you.
Absolutely not. We would be completely bereft if we didn't have you guys.
We would be like ghosts adrift in a black hole.
The nukes of your likes and subscribe.
It's the nuke of your likes and or $5 on Ko-Fi that can free us from our timeless prison.
Right. If you'd like to join the Order of the Orb Fox or get early access to our videos and other exclusive content by joining the English Club membership tier, we're available for memberships on our YouTube channel as well as our Ko-Fi. You can follow Jay on Twitter at SBU_English Club, as well as myself on Instagram at SBU_English Club.
We are also in the process of considering whether or not to permanently migrate to Blue Sky as Twitter continues to deteriorate and become like a genuinely unpleasant place to be. This is me vamping for myself while I go and check our Blue Sky app because I know it's different from the other ones because I'm not good at social media. It is... I don't know what it is right now. But follow us on there. Find us. You know what we look like.
So, yeah. So without further ado, let's get into our summary. Last time on the SBU English Club, Zenith is all about Androma Andy Rosella, otherwise known as the Bloody Baroness, a space pirate-ess who loves flying around with her crew, Lyra, Breck, and Gilly. All names that you can forget about because they barely feature in the sequel. More on that later. They live in the Mirabel galaxy where there was a big uprising from this shitty planet, Zentera. Through a series of pretty fun adventures that go completely to plan, she ends up back on the planet she was exiled from as a child, which is called Arcardius. There, apropos of nothing, a childhood friend of hers reveals that he's actually the son of the evil Zenteran queen. Therefore, the half-brother of the book's antagonist stabs the general, Reed King, of the galaxy, declares loyalty to the evil queen, and then an army shows up and shoots everyone with hypno-goo, including Andy's crew. Now, this is exactly as out of nowhere as it sounds when I was summarizing it. But so basically, the entire world is hypnotized because of hypno-goo that was made by the evil queen, and Andy's childhood friend is actually her half-brother or whatever. Andy is critically wounded in the skirmish, but then her ex-boyfriend named Dex, who is just Knuckles the Echidna, and then Lyra's brother, who is named Lon, more on him later, and a dying General Cordus escape on the Bloody Baroness's ship, which is called the Marauder. But then before the general dies, he says, well, I guess I'm going to pass all the power of my absolute military dictatorship to Androma Rosella, the girl dying on the gurney beside me. Not
who I hate, who I personally hate and have hated for most of my life.
For killing my daughter by accident. So he does that. The end. You don't have to watch the episode anymore.
You should, though, because it's a good one, I think. I was listening back to it, and I think it holds up.
I had a lot of fun with it. But in terms of what this book is, it's just Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. I'm sorry, it just is.
It doesn't have AT-ATs, though, does it?
It doesn't have AT-ATs, but I'm serious, like, on a structural level, like, there's a parallel A and B plot, and one is way more interesting than the other. There's an ice planet, there's a Darth Vader, There's an I am your father moment where he takes off his helmet and says, look at me, it's the plot twist.
Oh, and there's a bunch of ghosts that have to be nuked out of a black hole.
Right. As everything that happened in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. So if you get lost in terms of plot beat and we start to ramble, dear listener, just think what happened at this corresponding time in The Empire Strikes Back, and you will be okay.
Okay, so Nexus. From Cinders to Tiara, Princesses of Earth, Volume 2.
Princesses of Mirabel.
Princesses of Mirabel, Volume 2, picks up right where the previous book ended. Mm-hmm. Andy is in a coma, but then wakes up, finds Dex beside her, is furious that her crew is not on board the Marauder, and immediately tranks Dex so that she can try to take control of the ship from Lon and steer it right back to Arcadius to go and free her girls, which is what she has started calling her crew in this book. I don't remember her doing that much in the first book, but in this one she will constantly refer to Gilly, Lyra, Memory, and Breck as my girls.
It's not unprecedented, but it's every freaking time with this guy.
So she's going to go and get him. But then she gets stopped by Lon, essentially. Dex wakes back up, they talk some sense into her, and they decide, hold up, instead of just rushing back in there, let's take a second to actually make a plan and see if we can figure out the best way to extract the crew from this developing coup situation.
Yeah. So we have this like ragtag group. Lon, who is Lyra's brother. Lon was a high-placed like soldier thing in the planet of Adira, where everyone has scales that turn different colors and get hot when they have feelings. But that never happens to Lon, notably. So I don't know if that was just a Lyra thing or what.
I kept forgetting that he wasn't human. For some reason, I was just imagining Greed from Full Metal Alchemist the whole time. I don't know why.
I don't watch Full Metal Alchemist. Okay.
Okay, don't. I mean, do. It's good, but it doesn't matter. We have a little perspective shift, and we soon learn that the Zenith goo, which, Andrew, you and I were very confused about last time, is not just a thing that was made up and happens to have the same powers as Valen's mind control powers.
Right.
It's actually made of Valen's DNA. So when somebody is shot with a Zenith goo bullet, they get injected with some of his DNA, which empowers him to add them to his stable of mind-controlled people, which is very quickly coming to encompass, like, all sentient life forms in all of Mirabel, with the exception of people who weren't outside when all the goo started raining down, and people who randomly are immune to it for reasons that will never be explained. No. Some people just are, including Dex and Andy.
They called, like, the ones that fell victim to Zenith weak-minded, so by corollary, one can assume that the capital U unaffecteds are strong-willed somehow in some nebulous way. Somehow. I don't know.
The criteria for that metric are very, very unclear, because you would think that, like, Gilly and Lyra and Breck would be about as strong-willed as Andy, or at least I would think that, given that they've all been space pirates together this whole time. But for some reason, the crew is mind-controlled and never breaks free, and Andy is just totally unaffected without any issue. Same with Dex, who doesn't strike me as particularly strong-willed. In fact, Knuckles the Echidna is famously weak-willed, so I'm not really sure what's up with that. But it is what it is.
Right.
We also learn during this chapter that Nor is building a big satellite, which is going to amplify Valen's powers so that he can permanently control everybody in the entire galaxy.
So Zenith, the goo, is more of like a primer. You can kind of do one or the other, but I think the tandem of the two gives him like absolute power over like time and space. I don't know. It was kind of weird, like why you need the goo in some situations and why you don't for others, but I guess you could just consider it like the first step of zombifying someone.
Yeah, I think the rules could have been ironed out a little bit better, but essentially it seems like Valen can control people in his immediate environment relatively easily. He can control a large number of people that are right near him even, but in order for him to like continually control people that are planets away, he needs to have had them be injected with the goo, and then the satellite is going to further enable him to control more people and better and for longer, basically. We also immediately learn that Valen, using his powers in this way, so with the goo but without the satellite in place yet, is like taking a really horrible toll on his body. Like he is already starting to like waste away. He's bleeding out of his nose and eyes at times. Like he is in a bad state, which is really interesting and feels like it was not set up in the first book at all. No. But I was on board for this because it immediately adds stakes and prevents this otherwise completely overpowered villain. It makes him a character as opposed to just a plot device. Right. He is interested in staying alive. Other villains will be interested in keeping him alive. And he himself has to wrestle with like his own dying body, which is pretty interesting.
there's a lot going on that I really like, especially in the beginning with this like B plot going on with all of our villains. So they're living in the conquered planet Arcadius, and Nor and Valen have never really interacted with each other outside of Nor literally torturing Valen so his psychic powers activate. So they have both this like genuine sibling love for each other and this like, okay, how do we navigate this? You know, Valen is much, much more powerful than her, so they need each other, but they also have this like weird history. And then there's their creepy uncle Darai, who's like trying to be Wormtongue so bad. He's like going around being like, hee, you should make the satellite quicker, Nor, or whatever. So it's like you understand what the characters are doing, why they want to do it, and who they are. And those are three things that I cannot say about a lot of the books that we've read for this podcast. So I was like so on board for this, especially because like Jay mentioned, Valen was pretty boring when he first was introduced in Zenith. He was either being tortured and saying vague things, being catatonic and saying vague things, or literally murdering his dad out of nowhere and announcing his fealty to someone that we barely knew. So I cannot overstate how interesting the dynamics are at play in this like paradigm that they are. There's this emotional tenderness between Nor and Valen that is not on display anywhere else, even like with Dex and Andy later on. Like you're not going to get like this level of connection anywhere else, and it's between like these two siblings who have like tortured each other.
I would go so far as to say, not to tip my hand, but I would go so far as to say that Valen and Nor are the real main characters of this book because of that degree of emotional tenderness that is between them. They have by far the best conversations and the best scenes together, whether it's ones where they're sharing their feelings or they're plotting to take over the galaxy. They feel like two people having a real conversation, or as real of a conversation as is possible within this sci-fi setting. And every time they were on screen together, and especially if Darai was there to like throw a little wrinkle into things, I was really into it.
And here's the interesting part. Here's the efficiency that shows how much Nexus has improved from Zenith, is that their conversations about their emotions are also conversations about taking over the galaxy and vice versa. So we're never in a situation like we see in Powerless where scenes that are for this purpose are always for this purpose. Everything's building up on top of each other, and you're like, holy crap, they're really going to shoot a giant satellite into the sky and mind control everybody. And they're so genuinely emotionally invested in each other that as the reader, you're almost like rooting for them.
Yeah.
Because compared to Andy and Dex, they're interesting. They're actually doing shit.
It humanizes the villains in like a really interesting way, in a way that I don't think we've seen in a single other book on this show.
No.
Where like, yeah, you almost want to root for them because you come to like them as people, apart from the fact that they're evil and dictatorial. Right. And then you remember that they're evil and dictatorial, and you're like, oh no, but they're still people. And I don't know, I thought that was cool. It's at least interesting in ways that other books have not been interesting.
While we're here, let's see if we can lay out their backstory as we know it when the book starts and their gonzo master plan. We've made a bunch of jokes about the Hypno satellite already, and I'm sure a lot of people are confused right now. So before we snowball into anything else like pretty heavy, let's see if we can just put this all together. The reason that Nor and Valen are doing this is because Nor received a psychic message from their mother, Clarin, as she died, saying, you need to free your people in Exonia. What is Exonia, you might ask, which is also what I asked, because I swear to God that word was not in Nexus, was not in Zenith, no matter like all those stupid bold talic scenes with Clarin. I don't remember that word. I remember the yielding. I remember the conduit. I don't remember Exonia. Did you remember reading the word Exonia?
No,
Jay?
I just remember the yielding and the conduit as well. Something, I'm the yielded, something, we gotta do the conduit. I don't know. That was all I got.
Right. So as we're alluding to, Clarin featured in a couple chapters in the form of Boltalic flashbacks where it just listed proper nouns, and it also featured Hypno essay, which we'll talk a lot more about in the future. Clarin is actually... an extra dimensional entity from this parallel universe called Exonia, whose only link to our universe, read the Mirabel Galaxy, is a black hole called the Void. Their uncle Darai is also from this place. So Nor and Valen are both half Exonian. Exonia is this horrible place, and it's like actively dying, and everyone hates it. So their mission is to free their people. In short, what they are going to do is they are going to mind control everyone in the Mirabel Galaxy long enough to gather the resources to nuke the black hole and release all of the ghosts that are in this black hole to flood the Mirabel Galaxy. Which I unironically love. This is so pulpy and so exciting, and the narrative expects you to take this 100% seriously, which is the best way to handle something so gonzo fucking stupid as the idea of nuking a black hole full of ghosts. I'm not even being the slightest bit ironic. I love this. This is like, if anyone's ever seen La Planète Sauvage, the René Laloux thing, that old, like, French sci-fi where it's just so, like, drug-fueled and trippy. I think it's, like, it's so fun. It's so fun. I love it. No notes. 10 out of 10.
It definitely harkens to, like, some of Philip K. Dick's less well-known novels, like, not Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep type stuff, but some of his more, like, weird and drug-addled psychological stuff.
Right.
And, yeah, it is very silly, and it's very fun. I think, to sort of clarify something, Exonia is a horrible place, and the people that live there are kind of, like, formless. Darai will describe it as, like, them not having bodies, and as that being kind of torturous, and it's, like, a place of darkness. I guess you could imagine, like, the Distortion world from Pokemon Platinum, if you wanted to, where, you know how, like, Giratina in the Distortion world is, like, kind of, like, shadowy, but then he comes into the regular world, and he has, like, the Pokemon form? That's kind of what I was imagining. And so the idea is that when the Exonians come through the black hole, post-nuking, they'll be able to, like, possess the bodies of the people already in Mirabel who are under Valen's control. Like, they'll be ready to be possessed.
Right.
That is a bit of a spoiler, but we're telling you that now at the outset so that you have a better idea of what the stakes are.
So yeah, that's their crazy plan. They don't know about Andy at this point. They don't really know too much about anything going on. As far as they're concerned, their influence is spreading across the galaxy. Nor is aware of the Unaffecteds, and there is a rebel movement called the Underground that is, like, giving her some trouble, but she doesn't really care too much about it. She's focused on this satellite. But then I guess, again, I don't know why she needs propaganda when she is mind controlling her subjects, but she's also really big on propaganda and having, like, hollow presentations in front of everyone.
So yeah, Nora's really big on propaganda and speeches, and she's about to give one of these speeches when the broadcast is interrupted by a scary figure in spooky red armor who calls themselves Arachnid, and they have, like, a robot spider perched on their shoulder, and the spider does all the speaking, and you can't see their face through their awesome red spider-themed helmet. And Arachnid says, like, no, Nor, fuck you, we're gonna come get you because we're the underground,
right?
And you're gonna be caught in our deadly web, Nor. And then Nor is, like, clutching the arm of her throne and is like, this simply cannot be. I must find this Arachnid at once.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's the end of that scene, basically. Then we cut back to Dex, Andy, and Lon on the Marauder. They're trying to, like, come up with a plan still to free Gilly, Breck, and the rest. And there's this funny moment where each of them pitches their plan, and their plan is very in line with their character. So, like, Lon's is, like, uber safe, super methodical, definitely not gonna work. Dex's is completely stupid. It's just a copy of what they did to steal a ship in the previous book, where they're like, what if we knocked out some guards and we dressed up as them and then we snuck in and got the girls out? That kind of thing. They're like weirdly childish also in a way, their plans are, which reminded me, Andrew, of your theory from the first book that like this is just a game that a bunch of kids at a sleepover are playing. And I was like, that put me back in that headspace where I was like, this could still be true. I feel like by the end of this book that doesn't hold up so well, but in this moment I was like, yeah, these are just kids pretending to be in a spaceship right now.
So with Zenith, I thought it was very childish up until the point where I literally did, like Jay mentioned, think that this was just weird girls playing pretend with each other. This book feels adolescent, like an edgy teenager is writing this down on loose leaf paper in between her math homework. Not in like the Lauren Roberts way, but just like a vague emotional kind of sense where both there is still like this level of immaturity still there, but there's a lot more like edginess and darkness at play.
And some emotional complexity, too, which I think is indicative of growth. It's sort of like if one of the girls from that sleepover grew up and then went back and found a diary entry where she detailed the game that she had played with her friends, and she was like, I'm going to turn this into a novel. That would be this novel. So it still has a little bit of childishness at the beginning, but as we're about to see, it's about to get much darker.
Oh, yeah.
So we soon learn that Dex and Andy are both infected. They were shot during the invasion. We get confirmation of this because I believe it was left somewhat ambiguous at the end of the first book. And this is going to cause some tension initially because they're not sure why they're not affected. This is something that the novel is going to kind of just forget about. They're never going to be affected. They're just going to be immune. In one of our dramatic readings, I read the part where Valen is like, they've always been immune. I always knew they were immune. We don't know why. They just are. So don't really worry about that too much. Eventually, the trio decides to like turn on the TV, and they happen to catch Nor's speech just as it's being interrupted by Arachnid. So they decide to go in search of Arachnid, and that's where that chapter ends. They're just like, yeah, let's go looking for Arachnid, see if we can figure out what's going on with that guy.
That's their best lead, right?
We then do something that I was very surprised by. We get a chapter from the perspective of mind-controlled Lyra.
Yes!
Which is something that we're going to get multiple of, and they are so interesting to me. Andrew, do you want to take this one? You seem enthusiastic.
No, I don't necessarily like feel strongly about it, but I was also really, really interested in the mechanics of the hypno-goo, because the personality of the victim is pretty well preserved. We see both through Lyra's perspective and through like NPCs that we come across, that like someone who is hypno-gooed to love Nor Solis will have like the same personality that they had before, but now they're just like, oh, I sure do love the queen or whatever. And like, I have opinions about whether or not these scenes should even be in the book, but it feels like a dream. Like, it feels like you're still hearing from Lyra's perspective, but it's all like through this layer of abstraction because she's under the control of hypno-goo satellites. So I was so interested in like how much like she could break out of it. I was trying to piece together like how this was working a lot in a good way. Like, I wasn't confused. I was just like, oh, this is interesting how this works.
I was intrigued by it as well. I will say they don't usually move the plot forward, these scenes, but like I appreciate that we get them because we get better insight into how the mind control works. Like Andrew was saying, it seems like the personality is mostly the same, but then like their love of Nor Solis just kind of like gets tacked on. It's a little weird, but it works well enough. During this scene, Lyra witnesses the punishment of two unaffecteds, like they get publicly punished, and she doesn't care, which is like kind of eerie. And so I did like this scene for that reason, where it's like, you know, even though Lyra like didn't really do much in the first book and is going to do even less in this book, like we did get enough of her to know that like that would have freaked her out. And now she's just like, oh yeah, that had to happen because they don't worship Nor and you're supposed to worship Nor. So like that's creepy and weird, and I appreciated that scene for that. We then flip back into Nor's perspective. She's really worried about Arachnid and what she may or may not know about her plan, that's Nor's plan, to break into Ixonia. So naturally, like any world leader, Nor immediately jumps to the conclusion, oh, we will nuke the planet that Arachnid is on, and so just completely eliminate her from the board. But when she goes to nuke an entire planet on a hunch, the nuke button is like access denied.
Right.
Because you need the general's permission, formerly would have been General Cortas, to nuke anything. But because he is dead, there's a new general, and Nor doesn't know who it is. And apparently this system that authorizes who's allowed to nuke things is so secure that it's unhackable.
And it doesn't tell you who the current general is.
Right. There's nothing to indicate the current general.
Which I could nitpick this for days. It bothers me so much. I can excuse the not telling you who the current general thing is. Maybe that's a crazy security clearance thing. But not verbally, but like nigh on verbally, General Cortus just says, hey, this girl who I hate, who has no connection to me whatsoever other than that she killed my daughter in the equivalent of a drunken car crash as a teenager, she's going to have my absolute power. I'm not giving this to anyone else. What if he had died without making the transfer? What if he didn't want to give Andy the power? What if it went to freaking Lon or something? Like, there's so much that like barely works in this that I get so like nervous thinking about it.
Yeah, it definitely is a little bit immersion breaking because it invites those like distracting like what if questions. Like,
right.
What if one night he got a little too drunk and he was like, I'm gonna make the poorest person in the city general, and then him saying it made it true. Like, I don't know. Like, is that really all it takes?
But so yeah, now we need the nuclear launch codes from whoever the general is. Nor doesn't again know that Andy exists or anything about her. So blind leading the blind here.
That's so true. Nor barely knows Andy exists, period. Like,
period.
They didn't even really encounter each other in the first book. And that'll become relevant by the end of this one, but I don't know. It is weird to think about. Anyway, in the next chapter, while they're out looking for Arachnid, Andy has a nightmare. It doesn't really matter.
No.
What matters is that in this chapter, they then crash land on the ice planet. Ice planet of Solara.
It is Hoth. It is Hoth. It is Hoth with like Sandy Cheeks domes that are like terraformed to be summer weather.
Yeah.
It is Hoth. Just it's an ice planet.
It's Earth from Rentung and Dorner. They've got ice planet and then a bunch of climate-controlled heat domes.
I'm an idiot. It is Rentung and Dorner. I blocked that book from my memory, so I missed the poll there.
They crash land and then they get chased by a group of people from like a nearby dome, and it turns out that one of the people was a former colleague of Dex's named Clarissa. And she explains how to find Arachnid, and then the group fights an ice dragon that appears, and Lon sacrifices himself so they can get away.
No, listen to how this plays out, because it is like diegetically probably minutes of time, reading it's seconds of time. We learn that one of these people has this deep years-long connection with Dex, to the point where she's almost presented as a romantic rival to Andy because they like cattily don't like each other or whatever. We learn all about, they used to spin the bottle with all their fellow soldiers and she was a good soldier and all that stuff. Then the ice dragon attacks as suddenly as Jay presents this information, and Clarissa gets eaten by this monster who never comes back, was never mentioned before, and just shows up for this one scene. So and her and all of her little mook friends, like I knew like the unnamed characters were going to die, but this feels like, I think Clarissa it's spelled Clarissa with a K and only one S, so I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. But anyways, Clarissa, because she's on the ice planet. I think that she was intended to have been a bigger character, and I know exactly what character they replaced her with, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But I have my theories, because it is like, this is my friend Clarissa. We have XYZ memories together. And then she gets murdered by a dragon. It is like that. But yeah, like Jay mentions, like they fly away in the other ship the ship that Clarissa and her people used, because the Marauder is just like completely borked at this point. So they fly away, the dragon grabs it, and they're like, oh, we can't escape, our thrusters aren't enough. And Lon is like, witness me, and takes a grenade and jumps into the mouth of the dragon. It explodes. And I felt really weird about that, because Lon was barely a character in Zenith. And then I was like, okay, well, this is our new crew. This is Dex, Andy, and Lon. They're the new people for this episode. And then, then he blows himself up in a monster that kills people that we don't care about. I don't know why they did it, basically.
It is weird. It's like we barely care about Lon. We barely care about Clarissa. We barely care about this dragon. But, like, so much is staked narratively on all of this being very cool and dramatic. And on top of that, they just ditch Memory. If you remember, the Marauder's ship Memory is a sentient being who is pitched in the beginning of Zenith as like a member of the crew. They're just like, forget about Memory, I guess, ironically enough. And she will not be a character for the rest of the book. No. You can just remove Memory from your mind.
A sentient being capable of love.
Yeah, for all of our Alfie heads in the audience wondering which prediction was right, whether Alfie and Memory would form a singularity, or whether one of them would turn out to be gay, you can keep wondering forever, because we'll never know.
The series ends without an answer. So yeah, they go to the place that Clarissa indicated, some domed city, don't worry about it, and they're like, oh, well, everyone wears these, like, weird get-ups, we can blend in, they won't see our silver veins, which is like the telltale sign of being under mind control. But and speaking of Alfie heads, Alfie comes back for like a second, like it is just in like this string of chapters and never again. He's like in her little watch thing.
Isn't it one of her flashlight wrist bracers that he lives inside?
It totally is.
Yeah, so he lives inside the Apple Watch that's embedded in her wrist, and he does talk to her for like a second, almost enough time to tell her that she is the general, which she doesn't know yet because Dex hasn't told her, because she was in a coma when General Cortos made her general. So he's about to tell her, and then I forget why, but she's like, Alfie, you're talking too much. You shut up. Just as he's about to spoil that for her. So that's Alfie's role in the plot.
Right. So it was, well, he reveals 2 points of information that I want to harp on. One, he says they're talking about Valen and Nor just in kind of an expository way, and he's like, incorrect. There was not a pathogen in Valen's blood, but 50% of his DNA originates from error, or like he like glitches out or something, and he's like, of all of my memory banks, of all of my knowledge of DNA, incorporating every living creature from one part of the inhabited universe to the other, which the narrative is sure to specify, is so long that even with the warp technology and cryosleep, that one cannot reach from one side to the other in their lifetimes. He says there is no DNA match for 50% of Valen's DNA, which we the reader know means that he's Exonian, but obviously Andy and Dex don't know what to do with that information. And then they're trying to find the bar. There's supposed to be like a pub that they can go to meet up with the underground. And they try all the bars in the city and don't find anything, and everyone just has silver blood. And then they reach this one last building, and they're like, this looks like it could be it. This looks like a shady underground bar. Why didn't you tell us about it, Alfie? And then Alfie's like, because it is listed on Google Maps as a speakeasy, which is not a bar. Which goes back to kind of what you were saying, Jay, about why you hated Alfie in the first place, is because this robot intended to understand the nuances of human communication doesn't know to conflate a bar with a speakeasy.
Yeah, he's literally worst at the one thing you would think he would need most to do. Because originally Alfie, for anybody that didn't go back and listen to the Zenith episode, Alfie was originally intended to be like an attendant in diplomatic meetings between General Cortos and other people. So
he's
like his
C3PO.
entire purpose... Yeah, he's C-3PO. His entire purpose would be to, like, make sure that, like, social engagements go smoothly, which would include translation, I presume.
Right.
So, it's weird that he doesn't get this stuff.
Right, and I guess they conceived him as a bit first, which is why they got rid of him, like, right now, and he never comes back.
They realized this part was going to be darker, and they realized, okay, there is no space for him in this story at all. So this is basically the last we'll see of Alfie. So goodbye to Alfie and to memory. I want to cut back to something that technically happens before this, but it doesn't really matter when we introduce it. We just might as well do it now. This is the part where we get from Valen's point of view, him going into his mind palace for the first time. His mind world is basically like a big scary castle made of obsidian where everybody who is under his control is imprisoned in a jail cell, and he walks around in a big crimson velvet robe and plays it king. So if anybody was unsure whether or not Valen is gay, we can just say that in his mind palace, he likes to be a flamboyant little king who struts around in his palace and makes fun of people for being mind controlled by him. So I'll just leave that up to you, I guess, whether you think that makes him that.
That's a honeypot, if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, I dare you to say that he's gay based on that information that I presented in an unbiased way. I dare you.
But I think it's cool. I didn't like it at first. It was a lot for me to understand at first because they're trying to, like, obviously what they're trying to do is make this, like, cerebral process or the cerebral weird thing that he's doing more understandable on a physical level. So the Obsidian Palace, it's just a metaphor, both, like, in universe and out. It works, but kind of like on a Rintung and Dorner level, I was trying to be like, okay, so what does this represent? What does that represent? And that's a little bit of an exercise in futility. It's not as bad as Rintung and Dorner at all, but because you can, like, understand that, like, an obsidian cell represents one of the souls that he's controlled or whatever. So, like, it works. It just takes a little bit for you to get used to it.
It's easy to understand to the point of almost seeming cliche. I think the only thing that saves it from being cliche is the fact that I haven't really seen a narrative that does this exactly like this before. But, like, if there were more stories like this would be the easiest way to do this. The castle gets bigger, the more cells it has, the more people he's controlling. Once his power begins to splinter, a little bit later in the narrative, the castle will start to crack apart. So, like, the things that they correlate to seem, like, fairly self-explanatory most of the time. It works well enough for what it is. Dex and Andy briefly mourn Lon, and then they find their way into the underworld. There they meet Soyina, of all people.
Soyina Rubard, let's go!
Soyina mentioned.
My favorite bisexual.
My favorite chaotic bisexual who likes to handcuff people to toilets, I guess. That's her thing.
She says it 5 times.
It's the one thing we know about her. She keeps bringing it up. Anyway, she takes them to meet Arachnid. Dex and Andy get nagged by Arachnid, who's like, who says I'm even gonna let you join me? Even though she clearly is spoiler, even though the unknown gender, Arachnid, is clearly going to let Andy and Dex join them. She then pulls off her helmet dramatically to reveal that she is a she. She is none other than Clarin Solus, Nor's mom, who we previously thought blew up in a spaceship, killed by General Cortos, who had just realized that he had been mind-controlled into having sex with her multiple times.
Did they ever explain how she survived the explosion of a spaceship?
Not to my understanding, no.
I also don't think that they ever did. She says something like, us Exonians are hard to kill, or like something so weird. So just in case that you're a really dedicated listener and you have no idea what happened in Zenith, I want to level set for you what this means. This means that the narrative is looking at both you, the reader, and Andy in the face and saying, now it's time to be on the side of the unapologetic hypno-predator. That is what you are being told to do, and the narrative is not giving you any other option. Either you are okay with mass enslavement and nuking of a black hole, or you are on the side of a hypno-predator. Those are your choices.
But Andrew, she's so apologetic. She doesn't know if she was even mind controlling him, or maybe if he secretly did love her all along.
You're right. That totally counts as even remotely remorseful.
Yeah, totally.
Why didn't you mention Erin, the invisible lady?
Oh, because I don't care. Just like how I don't care about Havoc, the plushie who's been here the whole time as well, and I will continue to not care about.
Hold on, shut up, Jay. We're talking about Havoc, the marketable plushie pet, and Erin, the cool invisible woman. So Havoc, the invisible... Shit, I'm gonna get confused. So Havoc, the plushie pet, is like a cat, but it's really crazy, and it attacks Dex all the time, but they carry it around in their little backpack because Gilly loves it so much. And he's really cool. Available now on Redbubble for $19.99. Erin is this invisible woman who I am convinced was supposed to be Clarissa, but for some reason they decided that we're going with Erin. You know, this character who has this incredibly deep and long and important relationship with Dex, we gotta kill her. She's gotta get eaten by a freaking monster that never comes back. What we need is a woman who turns invisible and can turn other people and other entities invisible with the act of physical touch. And she's also the most annoying person in the galaxy. She always says, isn't it nice to see me? And then she turns invisible. It's like she's never funny. She's always annoying. The characters don't acknowledge that she's annoying, which makes it worse. And it's really bad.
I agree that Erin and Clarissa should be merged, because then when they meet her on the ice planet, she could say, "Ice to meet you," "Ice to see you," and that would be double funny.
I hate you so much.
So they meet them, and then is this where Clarin unloads her dramatic backstory on everybody?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is when they first meet each other.
Before we do that, I'm going to insert a couple of Nor moments that I feel like we can brush under the rugs, because I think the Clarin thing is going to take a minute to explain.
Yes.
So basically, Nor begins a plan to execute one of Andy's crew members publicly as a trap to lure Andy in. She decides, okay, I am going to contrive a public execution of one of the crew members, and I'm going to give forewarning so that she has time to come to the rescue. Nor gives a speech laying the trap, which is then firebombed by Arachnid. So Nor is on Arcadius giving a speech. Some of Arachnid's troops storm in, firebomb the speech after Nor has already announced that she's going to kill one of the crew members. And in the firebombing, Valen attempts to compel the crowd to stop panicking, but fails, and in the end ends up jumping towards a soldier who has his gun trained on Nor, ready to kill her, and pushes this guy aside so that instead of killing Nor, he shoots and kills Zahn Volkknop, who is, as we may or may not remember, Nor's boyfriend and also chief bodyguard.
That is not his last name.
It is. It is. They say it.
Volkknopf?
Yes.
I hate you.
Okay, sorry. You can blame Sasha Ellsberg and Lindsay Cummings. It's not my fault. Zahn Volkknop dies in Nor's arms, and then she is really mad at Valen, obviously.
Right.
Andy and Dex watch some of this happen along with Arachnid, and then, or maybe just before this, Arachnid unloads her huge backstory that alters the stakes of the entire story and fills in a lot of what we were confused about in Zenith. Andrew, do you want to take this away?
I'll try, but I'm gonna need you. I'm gonna need you very soon.
Okay.
But okay, so
I have a lot of notes for this. I'll do my best to fill some things in, but it's complicated.
So let's start with the very brass tacks. Clarin is not a human or a Mirabellian alien type, but an extra-dimensional being from a dimension called Exonia. So, Exonians are incorporeal energy beings, and they live in this dark, kind of twisted world, and Exonia is by some nebulous means fading away and dying or running out of resources, pretty much indistinguishably like shitty from Zenterra. So like I don't know why they added a whole new dimension, but whatever, we're not there yet. So they need to leave Exonia, but they are worried that if they all migrate over en masse, that this will be seen as an act of invasion, and they need corporeal forms to survive in Mirabel. So Clarin, Darai, and some third Exonian whose importance is negligible because he gets murdered later on, are what's called yielded. So by some means not explained to us, the Exonians gave physical form to these people so that they could come over to Mirabel and I guess expand their sphere of influence or whatever. So that is how Clarin entered the universe as we know it. By equally unexplained means, she ended up in Zenterra, where she compels, with her mind control powers, the king of Zenterra named Adonis to fall in love with her. This was not known to us at the time of reading Zenith, correct?
It was not known to me, J Podcast.
It wasn't known to me, Andrew SBU, before either. So, like, we knew that so not to get all of our timelines messed up, but we knew that she mind-controlled Cyprian Cordus, but we just learned that she also mind-controlled the King of Zenterra. With him, she both had Nor and initiated her uprising, because she, I don't know, fell in love with Zenterra, or like her husband's love for Zenterra or whatever. So they had that whole Cataclysm war, and then for some like peacemaking deal, she ended up in the custody of Cyprian Cordus, who is the previous general of the galaxy before he handed his power off to Andy. Him, as we know, she mind-controlled and seduced, giving birth to Valen. As she's doing all this crazy shit, so like she has no dog in this race other than the fact that she loved King Adonis. So like everything she does for Zenterra automatically means so much less than it did before. And she's also like, hey, wait, if we come in and we take over the bodies, or, you know, we somehow conquer the Mirabel galaxy, that would be bad, I think. So I'm just going to give up that whole mission entirely and forget about Exonia. And I completely lose the plot after that. I guess she gets blown up.
Yeah, somewhere in there she kills the other Exonian that came through with her and Darai. She casts off Darai, and she fully commits herself to becoming a Mirabellan, essentially.
Right.
We also learn, I don't remember where this happens, but somewhere in there we also learn that her tongue was cut out, I think by Cyprian at the end of their relationship, which means that she no longer has any mind control powers. So for anybody that's wondering, like, wait, doesn't she still have those? Can't she use those now? She cannot, because she can't speak. So apparently it's tied to speech, at least in her case, although it doesn't seem to be tied to speech in Valen or Nor's case, because Nor also has this power. It's just really weak. Valen has it really, really good, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with speech. No. Whatever. Is there anything else?
Well, something I want to highlight while we're thinking about it, and I'll have more to say about this in a later section, but like we mentioned, Exonians can have other abilities that are not related to mind control.
Yes.
But they are also, by necessity, parasites to corporeal beings by virtue of the fact that they don't have bodies. Mm-hmm. And so these are completely parallel situations. Like, the mind control and the body taking over things have nothing to do with each other. And I don't like that, so we'll talk more about that later. But
Well, there's two other things that we should mention. Once the Exonians get inside of the bodies of the Mirabellans, they'll be permanently controlled. There's no undoing that. And in the meantime, the only way to free everybody from Valen's mind control is for Valen himself to free them.
Right.
So they can't just run in and stab Valen and everything be hunky-dory. He has to willingly free everyone. So that adds an extra complexity to whatever plan they're ultimately going to have.
Whatever freaking plan. Andy and Dex fuck around on Solera for so long. I don't even know what they do. They just like hang out and have angsty moments talking about how they like love each other or whatever, or don't love each other, or can't love each other.
In the chapter immediately following this, they get super wasted together, and then they have like a really heartfelt conversation about all the things that they've been through as lovers and as rivals, and it's like kind of sweet, but it's also the first and last time they have a meaningful conversation. So I didn't really write too much about it because it comes to nothing.
Yeah.
We then have another Nor chapter where we get like absolute confirmation that Zahn voll knapp is dead, and she has this weird flashback to like them falling in love as teenagers, which feels like too little too late. It's a cute scene. I enjoyed it, but it's really something that I feel like should have been in Zenith, because like their relationship felt very strange in the first book as well, and like very superficial, and now like trying to backfill like, oh no, actually they've been super in love the whole time, trust me, like they really love each other and they have this really beautiful story. Like I was like, okay, I don't know, it's too late for this now.
If it's not obvious, it is impossible to care about Zahn.
Not at all. But his death is important for the story because it leads to some really, really great conversations between Valen and Nor. For instance, the one where Valen blames himself for Zahn's death. He feels super, super guilty about it. And Nor blames Valen for pushing the soldier that killed Zahn into position to do that.
Right.
She's willing to forgive him, but she's like, I'm just really hurting right now, and it's going to take time. Like, I'm willing to forgive you, but, like, we can't have our buddy-buddy brother-sister thing going on right now because, like, my fiancé just fucking died in my arms. And Valen, who has no other allies or let alone friends in this whole situation, is like totally torn up about this, and it leads to like a worsening in his physical condition. Meanwhile, Darai keeps like getting into all these private conversations and, like you said, trying to be like a worm tongue and like get between them and make both of them more upset. And then Valen, like, straight up tells Darai, like, I wish you were dead.
Yes! Yes, that was so crazy.
Stone cold. He was like, I wish you were dead, Darai. And I was like, hell yeah, me too, Valen.
Holy crap. That got me so bad, because he was just like, yeah, I wish it were you rather than San. It's like, holy shit.
It was awesome.
I don't remember too much about Darai from the Nord chapters in Zenith, but he really like takes this heel turn super sharp.
He's very obviously doing this like manipulating vizier routine, whereas in the first book, the only really notable thing he did that I recall was like goad Nor into being mean to him so that she would prove to him that she was capable of being mean, and like he liked it when she was mean because that meant she was a good leader. It was very strange. It felt more childish than this does. Not to just reiterate that point, but like that was like a very playground type of like game to prove their power dynamics, and then this is a bit more calculated. It's still immature, but it feels evolved. There's another set of like Andy and Dex chapters where really nothing at all happens, so I'm just going to skip right back to our next set of Valen and Nor chapters. There's this one where Darai, who is like so obviously plotting something, if it wasn't already clear to you by this point, he convinces Nor to kill Valen and take his mind and plug it into the Nexus. This will punish Valen according to Exonian custom, which requires that, like, if someone takes a life, they give up their own life.
Sure.
So Darai is like, Nor, if you want to be truly Exonian and prepare for, like, the new Exonian way of life that's coming, you have to kill Valen for killing Zahn, which handily will also speed up the process of setting up Nexus, allegedly. In his mind palace, Valen then finally accepts that he is dying. So throughout all of this, his physical state's been worsening. He's been bleeding more and more. He's been getting totally emaciated. And his palace starts to crack. And he's like, oh shit, like, I am not going to make it in time for Nexus to be launched.
Right.
Nor then tells Andy's crew that she's going to kill one of them. The hypnotized crew is like totally on board with this. They're all willing to give themselves up, but we don't know who it's going to be yet. Then we have the scene where Andy is watching TV in the underground when Nor lines up the crew and stabs Lyra in the back on live television for all to see. Lyra falls to the ground, totally dead, you guys. Andy's like, no, and Lyra's not coming back. You can forget about Lyra coming back. She is dead.
She's dead forever.
She's dead and not alive anymore. Andy flies into a rage and is determined to rush to the rescue, but Dex and Claren are like, chill the fuck out. You're going to get yourself killed. You're going to get all of us killed. You cannot do this right now. Then we cut back to Nor, and Nor picks Lyra up off the ground, gives her a good old handshake, dusts off her knees, and is like, great work, kiddo.
Great work.
You really killed it out there. All the parents at the school play loved your performance. And Lyra's like, gee, thanks, boss. Really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm going to go have some orange slices and Gatorade in the green room. So the crew marches off stage, and Darai comes in and is like, hey, we really need to get this killing Valen thing moving.
Right?
You need to kill your
He's
brother.
so pushy about it.
And Nor is like, dude, why do you want me to kill my brother so bad? It kind of seems like you're up to something suspicious and evil. And Darai's like, yeah, the same kind of evil as you, bestie. We're all evil here, am I right?
Oh my god.
I totally don't have a more nefarious kind of evil in mind. Then Nor and Valen meet back up. They have this little reconnecting moment where they talk about their feelings some more.
Right.
It's really sweet, but doesn't lend itself very well to summary. Then, at the end of this conversation, just when it seems that Nor and Valen have made up and things are about to be back to normal between the two of them, Darai comes into Valen's hospital room where he's now lying because of how emaciated he is, and he uses psychic powers that we did not know that he had to immobilize Valen. So he's kind of mind controlling him, but he's kind of not.
Well, he kind of is, right?
So he is, but he's not, because like we saw in the Lyra chapters, when Lyra's mind controlled to love Nor, she genuinely does love Nor. Like, she's not pretending and like screaming within her mind, like, no, you don't, you have to stop doing this. Like, it's not like her body is disobeying
you're
her.
so right. Yeah.
When Valen is mind controlled by Darai, as he is going to be up until almost the very end of the book from now on, he is like locked inside his own mind. Like, Darai is like physically puppeteering him, including the things that he says, his facial expressions, whatever, but is not controlling his actual thoughts. So it seems like the mind control works differently if you're mind controlling someone who's capable of mind control. At least that was the impression that I got.
I didn't think about how that was different. I really did think it was compulsion, and maybe like Valen was so strong that he was able to resist that influence, because there are little hints in Lyra's chapters that like there was some shadow of doubt in Lyra's mind, but then she was able to blink it away. I don't know. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I just, in the moment, I was able to kind of excuse it.
Yeah, it didn't like break my immersion or anything. I just thought it was noteworthy.
It was weird, yeah.
When Nor gets mind controlled by Darai in a little while, spoilers, it's going to work the same way for her, where she's like, I don't want to be doing this, but I am. Like, I'm fully conscious of the fact that my body's acting against me. Could be that she is of exceptionally strong will. I would believe that based on her character. But it could also just be that like mind-controlled people are not immune to mind control, but like are able to be aware that they're being mind controlled.
Or
either way,
Darai's
it works fine,
abilities are uncannily different from Nor's and Claren's. I don't know.
And the goo and Valen's.
Wait, so when they say everyone has their own ability, they don't mean like, oh, some have psychic powers, some can shoot lightning. They mean everyone has uncannily different forms of mind control.
Everybody can mind control, but like in a different and unique way.
Right. I don't get it.
So anyway, Darai has immobilized Valen at this point, is going to be puppeteering him from now on. We then cut back to Dex and Andy, who have this like totally out of left field moment where it's like, actually, we do love each other. Let's make out really hard. Yeah. And then they do. Do you have anything to add to that? Because I don't really know what to make of it.
Well, so Aina comes in and she's like, "Hey, lovebirds, we got a mission to do," and that's it.
Yeah. So if you're starting to notice that like Dex and Andy don't seem to be doing much, and anything that they do is like very sudden and weird, that's not just me doing kind of a shoddy job of summarizing. That is really how it feels. Like they are not the main characters of this story. They are very much the B plot.
To a comical degree, they are not the main characters of this story.
Which is so weird because it feels like that's not what was promised by this series. Like, it's such a new direction in vision that I almost wonder, and I didn't want to tip my hand on this here, but I feel like now I've already walked myself into it. I almost wonder if there is some kind of, like, coup that happened at the level of authorship, and somebody was like, okay, Zenith was not it. I need to take over for Nexus, and my vision is going to be the one that is realized in the sequel.
Ooh, that would be fun. I have opinions about that. We'll talk about that later. But
okay, we can just leave that there.
Leave that question there and let it marinate for a little bit.
So anyways, Dex and Andy are going to sneak out and go do a mission, but then Claren catches them, and instead of like imprisoning them as she had previously threatened to do if she caught them trying to sneak out and save the crew on their own, she's like, actually, the time is right. I'm going to join you guys.
Right.
So Dex, Andy, Claren, Soyina, and Erin? Is Erin the name of the invisible girl?
Yeah, the invisible woman.
Erin all go off to save the crew and finally stop Nor and Valen and Durai.
But is Havoc there? Is Havoc on the ship with them?
I couldn't tell you.
I couldn't either. I forgot.
I have literally no idea. We cut back to Durai having immobilized Valen, at which point he reveals his plan to become the true king after Valen has been launched in the Nexus satellite to permanently mind control everyone forever. So the new plan that Durai has actually had this whole time is to launch Valen, have Valen instead start mind controlling everyone to love him, Durai, and then let the Exonians in, and then maybe also mind control all the Exonians to continue worshipping Durai? Or does he expect them to just worship him by default?
I think he expects them to worship him by default, and he's going to have all of the Good Mirabellans be like the hosts of the Exonians that are coming through. So I don't know what his intentions are with the Exonians themselves.
I know that once the Exonians are over and they've possessed people, he alluded to the idea of like spreading out to further galaxies within the same dimension as Mirabelle and just like continually expanding his control ad infinitum until he rules everything ever, I guess.
He just wants power. He's a Disney villain.
He's just evil. He wants to control everybody and be the king of all the kings, basically. Right. Oh, man. Okay, so I didn't really write out how the plans work, but Andy, Dex, Claren, Soyina, and Erin are on their way to meet with Nor to hand Andy over in exchange for the crew. Right. That way, Nor will have the codes that she wants. Andy will get what she wants, and that her crew will be freed. Right. And then, secretly, Claren and Andy have a plan that doesn't involve Andy getting captured. Meanwhile, Nor, of course, also plans to betray them and kill the crew before the handoff can occur. Also, Dex and Soyina are going to be invisible alongside Erin as backup in case something goes wrong, which of course it's going to, and it's like really confusing, and it kind of doesn't matter. No. Because as soon as everybody, good guys and bad guys, basically all of our named characters, except for Alfie and Memory, meet in a room, and they start to do the hostage exchange, and then they all just start shooting at each other, and everything goes fucking crazy.
It devolves so quickly, and it was so contrived too, because I didn't really track all of like the intersecting plans, but the idea is Claren as Arachnid. So Claren has not revealed her identity to her own children, I might add. They do this hostage exchange, and the idea is that Arachnid, quote unquote, is handing Andy off as like a political prisoner in exchange for a ceasefire. But both parties are obviously aware of the fact that that's not really what they're negotiating for, and they all have their own plans for fighting each other or stealing back whatever they're taking. So it's just like, it's so convoluted. And then like the reason that Dex gets revealed is like because he doesn't want to leave Andy's side or something. Like it's so like he gets so caught up on something bullshit in the moment, and then like reveals himself and Soyina and Aaron, and that's when the bullets fly. But as silly as it is, this is a very interesting like exchange of power, because there's always like someone's got something up their sleeve, or someone's got one last term to introduce at the last second. And then on top of all of this, you have Valen, who has like been puppeteered by Durai or whatever, and he's like, it's time for me to go to my satellite, nor this is the sacrifice that I want to make. But inside his mind palace, he's like banging on the walls. So you have all these characters that are like in this situation for all these different reasons, and I'm really into it. Like I was really enthralled by the last little bit of the story.
Genuine tension, genuine stakes. The tension arises from characters that we know and understand what they want and why they want it, and having opposite desires that are mutually exclusive. And I think it is a huge fix, Andrew, for something that you called out in the first book, which is that when you have this many characters in a room, it is really hard to block them all and keep track of them all, especially when you have multiple perspectives going on. But this scene proves that it is absolutely possible. You can do it, and it can make sense, even if it is a little bit messy.
Right.
It's doable. So the bullets start flying, chaos breaks out. Durai then takes control of Noor as well, which gives him everything that he needs, or eliminates, I guess, the last obstacle between him and ultimate control. So with Noor, who is the figurehead of the Zentaran / now Mirabellan, I don't know, alliance. I don't know what they really call themselves, but she's the queen of everybody because everybody's mind controlled.
Right.
She's out of the way now that Durai has controlled her.
Right.
Andy is taken prisoner. Dex, Claren, and the crew, who have been freed by Valen, get surrounded by soldiers. They seem like they're going to have to fight their way out of this thing. Durai takes Valen, Andy, and Noor to the satellite and prepares to plug Valen into it and launch it.
Right.
So we have like a little scene transition there.
Yeah. It's like this really screwed up, like H.R. Geiger-esque, like a mind needle flayer thing that they load him up into. It's genuinely very interesting to me. And like there's this time box because it takes 5 minutes to upload his consciousness, and we have the two-headed scientist from Zenith over in the corner like plugging on stuff, and Durai's like, go faster, you fool, and then like being all like Emperor Palpatine or whatever, and then forcing Noor to fight with Andy, who's escaped from her bonds. And like all this stuff is happening, and it's so interesting. It's so fun. I'm loving it.
Yeah. So Andy, once they're all inside the satellite, Andy breaks free of her bonds. Durai is having Noor fight Andy. Meanwhile, Valen's consciousness is being uploaded to the satellite. At that moment, Dex, Claren, and the crew, who had fought their way out of the previous room and are now in the final boss room with everybody else, join the big fight. It feels like a JRPG.
It does.
And Andy loses her fight with Noor, and she prepares to stab herself, as she had secretly discussed doing with Claren off-screen beforehand. So as a final failsafe, if everything else seems like it's going to go wrong, Andy and Claren agreed that Andy would kill herself so that the general ship would just pass into the ether, the nuclear codes would become inaccessible for some amount of time, maybe forever.
Forever.
It
It's literally crazy. You have to verbally transfer power in this screwed up absolute dictatorship.
In my head, the only way that this made sense is that, like, actually it would secretly be hackable. It would just take, like, 100 years or something. Like, I had to tack that on mentally, even if that's not in the text, which it isn't. But, like, in order for this to be believable and for me to not be jettisoned out of the fiction, I had to be like, okay, it is hackable. It would just take a really long time. It would just take a really long time. That's why this matters. So Andy's preparing to kill herself, but at the last second, Valen, who has been fighting to do this the whole time, finds the strength to throw off Darai's mind control and reaches out to Andy and is like, Andy, you have to kill me instead.
Can I add that the strength that he finds is from an orb, a glass orb that he finds in his mind palace with a feather inside.
It's not with a feather.
There's no feather. There's no feather. But it's like it's crazy to me because, like, we joked about it in Zenith, and then this book that was published before our Zenith episode responded to the joke. Like, it was literally a glass orb that gave him the magical strength to say, please kill me, Andy.
The magical orb also spoke in the voice of Kaylee, which, as a reminder, is the name of the girl that Andy was tasked with defending when she worked for General Cortos before she killed that girl and became a pirate. So, yeah, out of nowhere, Kaylee, who has not featured in this book at all, speaks to Valen from beyond the grave, manifests as an orb, gives him the strength to reach out to Andy, and is like, Andy, I'm going to free everybody from my mind control. You just have to kill me. So he does free everybody, and then Andy stabs him.
Yep.
She kills him right then and there. This freaks out Darai such that his focus is lost. Clarin is able to kill him. Mm-hmm. She stabs him, throws him to the ground, and then, like, breaks his back with her foot. It's weirdly brutal. Yeah, like, to make sure that he's dead, she, like, breaks his corpse's back.
It's crazy.
Which is weird. It's weird how intense it is. And all of the soldiers who were mind controlled come to their senses and a lot of them start crying, the book says, like, at the recognition of what they've done, which is, like, kind of dark and won't be reckoned with in the, 10 pages that are left. Everyone gets really self-congratulatory about the fact that they killed the bad guys, and then there's a time skip to after all of this has basically worked itself out.
Yep.
Essentially what we learn post-time skip is that the crew has gotten back together and returned to space pirating. Soyina has been crowned God King of the world. She's the new general. Nor and Clarin have completely disappeared, and Andy and everybody else are on their way to go fight some slavers. The end.
I want to remind anyone who may not remember, may not know, that Soyina Rumbard, she kind of helped out Dex every now and then. She was a little bit of a shady character, but she did nothing but torture and be a sex pest. I think we should give more torturers absolute military power just because they chained your boyfriend to a toilet that one time. This is about to be like the most hypocritical episode of SBU English Club Podcast, because when you summarize it, it sounds like bullshit, awful nothing, but experiencing it is like a roller coaster where, you know, there's some boring parts, but you're just like, this is crazy. This is fun. I want to see where these things go.
Yeah. It's hard to recommend this book because I wouldn't want to put anybody through Zenith.
Yeah.
But if you can stomach it, I can recommend Nexus for the Nor and Valen chapters. They don't lend themselves well to summary, neither do the few Andy and Dex chapters that are, like, kind of impactful, but they are enjoyable in the moment if you can actually manage to get to them.
And so weird, / pause, like, so bizarre, this world that we're dealing with. So I'm excited to tear this up because when you lay it all out, it really puts things into a new perspective. I feel my wheels turning. This is going to be fun.
This is going to be interesting. And I have a couple of good things to say that I would be happy to kick it right off with here in just a second. Let's do where Andy and Dex kiss.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure.
Oh man, who don't I want to be?
Right?
I want to be caught right in the middle of this beautiful moment.
You and Soyina.
I'll be the narrator and Knuckles, the echidna.
Okay. I'll be Cold Steel the Hedgehog.
Okay. His eyes were fierce and determined as he said, "You are my safety. Andy, we're two of the most unlovable people in this galaxy, and yet somehow we found each other." She wanted to laugh at that, at the sincerity and pure Dexness of the statement, but he kept going. "I intend to see to it that you live through this mission, so that when all is said and done, after we burned that mind-robbing witch and her brother to the ground, I can finally give you the life I've always wanted to give you, the adventures I always promised you."
I don't need you to give me anything,
Andy said.
I can happily take it for myself.
"You're right," Dex said. "You don't. But I'd like to try anyway."
Okay, how about we start with...
He pulled her to him, pressing his lips against hers. They hadn't touched, hadn't been close, in so long, but she found herself turning molten in his arms, found herself desperate for more of him as she wrapped her fingers in his hair, and every part of her became aflame. "I love you, Androma Rosella," Dex whispered against her lips. "I love you, and there's not a damn thing you can do to change my mind." That's probably a good place to call it.
Yeah. Oh my god. Okay, my faithful co-pilot Jay, now that you're de-gooed and that we've summarized Nexus, you want to start us out with warping into some good things about this book?
Yeah, so I want to talk about really quickly something that we rarely talk about because I don't think there's an engaging way to talk about it on a podcast.
Oh.
But like the sentence-to-sentence writing in this book has improved so much over Zenith that I would be tempted to believe that a different, perhaps more experienced writer had taken the reins away from a less experienced but very excitable writer.
You think?
We can talk about what that might mean later. I just want to keep it to the good right now, personally, and say that the writing has improved a lot. It makes for a more pleasant reading experience, even during the more boring chapters.
Okay, we don't need to get into it in too great a depth now, but I still have my opinions, and they still sound different from yours. But overall, I was really surprised by like how engaging the narrative was throughout everything. Like, you and me had our gripes while we were talking about things, Jay, but like there was never a point where I was completely ejected from the story. If you think of the story as like a spaceship and my enjoyment as like a landing strip, the spaceship kind of crash landed and then went psh, and then its little nose got to right at the point where I would be tired of it, and then went like ding, and then everything was safe. Because like there were points where I did feel like I was a little bit at risk, but like everything was handled so well, and I think it is a testament to our mission here at SBU, because the reason it's so good is it leans into this crazy shit. Like, we have to upload a guy like an H.R. Geiger painting into a mind control satellite so we can nuke some ghosts out of a black hole. Like, only a mature writer could take something like that and then demand that you take it 100% seriously, that you stay with it for the long haul. And that's why I think the Nor and Valen chapters are infinitely more interesting than anything going on with Andy and Dex.
I don't want to appropriate your language here, so I'm going to ask you if I'm using this right. Would you say that that's a classic case of effective suxposition?
Yeah.
The fact that the narrative is just like, hey, there's ghosts trapped in this black hole, and the only way to get the ghosts out is to blow it the fuck up. And then not blink as it stares directly into the reader's eyes and dares them to say that that's dumb? Is that suxposition?
I think, yeah, it's either suxposition or it is like suxposition's brother, because it is the same concept. It's like, this is what we are doing, shut the hell up and read my book.
And don't get us wrong, we know it's silly, we know it's dumb. but
Yeah.
like the confidence with which the narrative commits to that and is unwavering is pretty admirable, I think.
Right, because if this were powerless, what we would see is like Dex would elbow Andy and be like, "A ghost in a black hole. Well, that makes sense," and like completely ruin like everything. But there's some zingers, there's some like little silly jokes, but there's never like a meta Marvel like shit that just ruins a scene.
There's never a moment where where Valen is elbowing Nor and is like, you're gonna want to see this, and then like Darai is like plotting in the background, like it just happens. And speaking of Valen and Nor, that's like my biggest positive. Their scenes where they are having these like tense brother-sister interactions are some of the best person-to-person interaction scenes that we have ever had submitted to Club. Bar none. They are so good. And I don't just mean compared to like other English Club podcast books. I think that they're just good. Like the emotional honesty that is on display when Nor is like, "Hey Valen, I hate you right now, but you're my brother and I also love you and I'm gonna forgive you, but I can't bear to look at you right now." That's really raw and very real, and I think it makes a lot of sense for a character who, even throughout Zenith, has been established as like moody and kind of sulky, but in Nexus has also kind of grown into somebody who is a bit more comfortable expressing herself and like wielding power.
Yes.
So it's great character work, and the way that Valen is like on his knees begging her to forgive him like right now, and who is like a dependent younger brother who again has no allies in this situation beside Nor and can't bear to be abandoned to basically have to deal with Darai while Nor refuses to talk to him. It like feels very real. Like I can totally understand why in his position he would be like, "I can't wait for you to forgive me later. I need you to forgive me right now."
Right.
I just thought it was great. Like, I don't even have anything to add to it.
Yeah, and I think it's burned in my mind the way you said it about Nightbane. In our YouTube video, we called this Zenith is Lightlark in space. This is Nightbane in space, but good, because it reminded me of that scene at the bar with Azul, where, how did you say it? You said, when two characters that we know decently well talk about their feelings, we get a completely new perspective and an ability to really understand where they're coming from and get invested in their stories. And that's exactly what's happening here. And I don't know why it works for Valen and Nor so much better than it does for Dex and Andy. I wonder where the ball was dropped on the Dex and Andy side.
I have thoughts on that, and I'll go ahead and say them now. It would fit better, I think, in the critique section, but to answer your question, for me at least, I think it's because Dex and Andy are so tied to like the pulpy, run and gun, pirate shooter fun promise that Zenith made to readers. Like Dex and Andy feel like they belong to that story about like piracy and heists and silly antics, and they feel out of place in this story. So when all of a sudden they are having to have these really earnest conversations with each other, it feels forced. Whereas Nor and Valen, to me, feel less tied to that inherent promise that was made in Zenith. And so like they're a little bit more free to have these conversations and it feel natural.
It makes sense to me, but we're going to have to get these two authors on the podcast one day, because I just... There's no reason that Andy and Dex had to underperform. You mentioned pulpy run and gun silliness. We've said it 5 times, so I'm not going to go back over how silly the premise of Nor and Valen's storyline is, but they're doing silly stuff too. Like, it's a little bit darker, it's a little bit more emotionally charged, but I feel like we could have spun this into, hey, everyone we know is mind controlled and we have this history, but right now we're the only thing that each other has. We're at worst like the devil, you know. There's something in that dynamic that I think could have been just as compelling. I wonder if this might have been a split custody thing, if maybe our less experienced authors wanted to do the run and gun romance and have cute boys being kissed, but then like she doesn't know she's bisexual yet, and then Soyina shows up and she's like, ooh, you looking for a third? Or like, I don't know. It's night and freaking day, and it doesn't have to be. But it's still all good.
Selina's like, hey, I spotted you guys from across the bar, and I love your vibe. Do you want to go kill Nor Solus with me?
Right.
But no, you're right. There's really no reason that they should have to, as you said, underperform. I like that, like they're actors or something. It's like, yeah, it could be a split custody thing, or it could be that on some level, whether conscious or not, our authors realized that Valen and Nor were just a more interesting dynamic than Andy and Dex are. And so, again, whether conscious or not, their romance manifested in like a more familiar and less convincing way than this more interesting villain brother-sister dynamic.
Yeah, I wonder about that. But I think it's kind of an exercise in futility. Because again, syntactically, there's not chapters where the prose is worse than others. That's not the case even in some of our books where there's only one author. Case in point, Nightbane, where the first 4 chapters felt like they came out of Lightlark, and then the latter half, or latter 75% of the book, was absolutely fine. So there's just so much cohesion that it's very interesting to play with.
No, I think that's the thing that's worth reiterating, is that it really is miraculous that in a book that was written by 2 authors where we really have no insight into how exactly they split that work up, the prose feels like it was all written by the same person, which is not the case in every book that we have read.
Right. Departing a little bit from the shared custody thing, again, I'm still processing at the time of recording my feelings about this book. And there are a lot of points that I have written down in my notes that I can't decide which box I'm going to put them in. But I can be sure about this thing. So hear me out. This book is maybe not cruel, but like unrelenting. I don't know exactly the right word, but like I mentioned, when we meet Clarin in her physical form, she says to Andy, and the book says to the reader, here's this hypno-essay pervert freak who has caused all of these problems. She's either your ally or you're okay with the total enslavement of the galaxy. It's not like a very mature book. It feels cruel in like an adolescent sense, but it does not pull its punches at all. Where it matters, it will hit you in the face. And I think, again, that shows a lot of maturity, and it made the narrative a lot more engaging. Like Darai, especially like right before the ending, like the 70 to 95% mark of the book, has like godlike powers essentially because he's controlling these 2 superpowered people. And like Valen is being puppeteered to say, you have to kill me, Nor. And Valen is inside of his obsidian castle being like, get me out of here, I'm gonna die, I don't want you to put me in this satellite. And then Nor, using the aforementioned deep conversations and deep understanding of her brother that she's gathered throughout this book, is debating with herself whether or not she should actually believe him. She suspects foul play too, but ultimately she's like, well, maybe this is right because I see how in pain and how much Valen is deteriorating. And it's all coming together in a way that feels, I keep saying cruel and I keep saying mean, but just imagine like /pause in front of it. Not badass, because that's like a millennial term. I don't know.
It's awesome sauce.
It's awesome sauce, epic bacon on fire. It's like the hottest sauce at your local gastropub IPA brewery. I don't know. I don't know if I'm
that
like,
hot
even
sauce bottle
remotely
has like a
sense.
Picture of a guy with like a beard and a mustache and like a plaid shirt for sure.
I don't know if any of this makes sense to you, Jay, but like I was like there were points where like I would almost be offended by the narrative. I was like, how dare you imply that my only options are galaxy-wide enslavement or Claren Solis? And then I was like, wait, that's pretty cool that you were able to present this information to me that way.
It's interesting in that it's like unafraid to present like a legitimate moral quandary.
There you go.
I don't know that it comes to anything because I don't feel like the characters have to make a meaningful choice and then like live with the consequences of that. But in concept, it is cool that both options are legitimately really horrible and neither of them secretly leads to like you get to kiss the boy that you wanted to kiss or whatever, which is like the case in a lot of these books that we've read where like you make a difficult choice.
Right. Do I date Oro or Grimm is not an interesting conundrum.
No, it's not.
Do I sacrifice my brother, whom I've tortured for so long, to unlock his psychic powers, but we actually get along pretty well, is interesting. And my creepy uncle is really keen on this happening, so do I trust him? So, like, I don't know. I was glued to the page for most of the last thing, and then there was the whole hostage thing, which, again, builds up on all of these things that we've been establishing. It's very well crafted, and I just can't get over it. I'm so floored, I guess just because we've been so beaten into a pulp by Lightlark and powerless that when we see something that isn't just completely fucking stupid, we have a good time with it.
It's also not evil in the way that like Wild Animus is evil, because that's another book where like characters are presented with like bad options. But like in this book, clearly the objective is not to like convince you that Rich Shapiro is God. The objective is to entertain you with like a fun pulpy story, and you get this fun moral quandary to consider on the side as like an enjoyable, like you said, it contributes to like that range of emotional experiences that it is the goal of a book like this to have you experience as a reader. It wants you to take you on an emotional roller coaster, to use a cliche, and it succeeds in doing that, I think.
For sure. Dextro Erez had never truly believed that the God Stars were tangible beings. They were soul-felt, a comforting presence inside your heart, an idea that filled your mind as if soldered on with iron and fire, always nearby, yet as far away as the stars in the night sky. Dex's body was tattooed with the God Stars' white constellations, a living shrine to their power and strength. Here, on his left arm, were the twisting, intertwining patterns that symbolized the twin God Stars of life and light, and on the back of his right shoulder, stretching up towards his neck, the angular constellation that marked the God Star of hope. Which, like, that is probably, like, all of the exposition we are ever going to get about the God Stars.
Yeah, until we learn that they are physically real entities that live in Exonia or adjacent to Exonia, that like Claren's people have more direct contact with them, but we're not going to explain that or explore that at all. We're just going to tell you that it's true.
Oh my god. I was glad that the world building was deepened a little bit. It opened up a lot more questions than I think it answered anything, but I think it'll be one of our first dramatic readings. Like, there's a little bit more discussion of what the God Stars are, and the more I sit in this world, I'm okay with a nigh universal spiritual religion in this spacefaring society. I still think it's a little stupid. I'm not completely walking back everything that I said in Zenith, but like, it makes sense. I'm not as pissed off by them every time they were mentioned as I was before, and I think that might just be like Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know.
I had a similar thought where I was like, okay, I kind of vibe with this a little bit more now, but like, is it just because I saw it previously that I was vibing with it? Like, did anything actually change, or was it just already familiar, and so it didn't trigger all of the irritations that it initially triggered?
Well, what bothered me originally is they were just the God Stars. There wasn't a specific cosmology of them or anything. So having a little bit more specificity on it made more sense to me, because if they're more ambiguous, then you're just like, oh, like any old star? Like, just just the star that is Detroit that you have to go around whenever you're going home. Like, but if there are these like extra special stars, it makes more sense.
It does. I think, like you said, it raises a lot of questions that don't get answered. Some of that's okay, but other questions I think are more distracting than anything. Like the implication that the God stars come from a dimension that is adjacent to both Mirabel and Ixonia, but more adjacent to Ixonia than it is to Mirabel, and so the Ixonians like have direct communication with some of the God stars and can talk to them like people. And like, again, those are all very cool implications, but like they get you to waste a lot of time asking questions that even the narrative isn't interested in,
right?
Which makes me wonder why it prompts us to ask them. But I do agree with you fundamentally that like having the God star lore being expanded a bit is generally a plus.
Right. It's not perfect step, but it's something.
It is something. I also think that like the God Star of Death, that's fairly expected, but like Hope is an interesting one to invoke that I also think pairs very naturally with like, if stars are going to be gods, stars feel associatively linked to hope very closely. So like there being a god of hope is both an unexpected thing for a god to be, but like intuitive for a star god to be, if that makes sense. So I like that.
While we're talking about things where I'm not sure if I actually like them or if I've just been conditioned to like them or have been the victim of someone's compulsion ability to like them, this book did the impossible. It made me interested in the mechanics of the hypnosis and made me want to learn more about how that's supposed to work, which we've talked about a little bit in our summary already, but like in Zenith, I was completely squicked out by it. And I think the difference here is in Zenith, it was always more visceral and personal and intimate versus this, where it's just like, it might as well be the common cold, you know? It's just this virus, this literal virus that spreads through the galaxy.
Yeah, in Zenith it is a lot more personal. Like we only really see it being used one-to-one and in like these like extremely fucked up scenarios that are literally intimate. Whereas in this, it is much more impersonal. They call it a virus, and it's just a thing that affects everybody, and they mostly use it for like mundane stuff, like having people be soldiers to march around behind Nora and like protect her, which like obviously if that were real, it would be just as fucked up, but in a book, it feels low stakes. It's like, whatever, it turns everybody into stormtroopers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't like make it like something I enjoy or like think would be excusable under any case. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say like I was like nauseated in Zenith. Here I'm just like darkly fascinated.
I know that you felt kind of differently about this, but I really liked the Mind Palace scenes. I feel like it is a fairly conventional way to make something abstract feel tangible, but I think that, for one, it characterized Valen a bit more, like the fact that he chose to make it a castle reveals a bit more about his psychology and his desire to, like, be a little royal guy prancing around in his cool castle. And also, it makes the mind control, like, feel more like a thing that he is actually doing as opposed to just, like, a passive thing that, like, how do I phrase this? That just happens through him.
Yeah,
like,
he's the conduit.
He's a conduit, through the yielding.
Yes.
It makes it feel like a thing that he's actually doing. And it makes it easier, I think, in turn to digest. Like, when we see him going through the effort to, like, make and expand this castle, it makes it easier to accept that, like, he is dying as a result of the effort of it.
Right.
I think that conceptually him controlling, like, the whole universe and as a result, like, being weakened to the point of death would make sense even without the Mind Palace, but actually getting to see it and have it be a place that grows and then begins to collapse as he weakens, like, makes it feel more visceral and more tangible.
The reason I didn't necessarily, and I came around to it, but at first I didn't vibe with the Obsidian Mind Palace Castle is more like I've just internalized too deeply the thing about like never having dream sequences, because what we get out of this is not nothing. You mentioned it very well. This characterizes Valen. This gives a very like tangible metaphor for the concept of the psychic weight of controlling the entire universe. Everything like is there in terms of conveying this information, but what we're getting is more symbology and more like abstractions of what's quote unquote actually happening. It, like a dream, very rarely results in any change in Valen. It's more of a reflection of things that are already happening to him.
Yeah.
So, like, I would never put in my suggestions section, like, get rid of it or anything. I would just say, like, they might have been a little bit long for my taste. I would still put the Obsidian Palace in the positive section, ultimately. It's just, I think there was a little bit too much of it, and we were asked too resolutely to put our feet there physically to really have it work as the symbol that it ultimately is.
It definitely slows down the narrative in a way that feels a little bit at odds with, like you've said, like the pulpy vibe that the rest of the thing is going for. But I think it works better than dream sequences, at least for me, because of what you've already said, but also because there are things that Valen does other than just like describe the Mind Palace. For instance, he's got that doorway that connects his Mind Palace to Nor, and there's moments where like Nor isn't connecting with him anymore because like she's mad at him for killing Zahn Vollknapp, and Valen is like knocking on the door like, Nor, please, like talk to me, and that feels like progress. That feels like a character attempting to achieve something and failing, but still attempting to achieve something that couldn't as easily be done in the real world. Like, it would be less interesting if Valen just went up to Nor's real life door and was like, talk to me, because we already had him do that. So like, I think in those ways it works well.
Not a lot of arachnid stuff is going to be in this section, but in terms of design, I kind of liked it. It again makes associative sense that like she had mind control powers, and to lose that she had her tongue cut out, and having the cool spider droid that robotically relays her thoughts is really cool. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I liked the visual of the character.
Dude, the robot spider pet that talks is so cool. That's awesome. I actually love that.
There was never a point where I skimmed over the action, which I do all the freaking time. I don't know why, or like what specifically about this prose I enjoyed so much more, but gotta hand it to you. I think it really worked out.
I did skim over the dragon fight. Sorry.
The dragon fight sucked. The dragon fight was horrible, but like, I don't know, you know, even the part where Lon throws himself into the dragon's mouth, I thought it was fun, you know.
It was fun. It was cool.
I honestly, like, if I didn't think it would like peak the mic, I would applaud this book. It really made me so giddy. I know like that both of these books came and went before SBU was even a twinkle in the internet's eye, but it's so cool to see how, you know, all that whole screed I had about Lauren M. Davis, just be weirder and it will be better. This is case in point. This is the exception that proves the rule. You know, sometimes when we do this, especially with certain authors, Rich Shapiro, I feel like this is just a futile effort, and we're at best doing nothing, at worst just kicking some freak while they're down. But like here I'm like, this Zenith could have been something, and Nexus is something, which proves it. Nexus and Zenith are a cohesive duology, and I have my opinions about the directions that it went, but one cannot argue that there's no connective tissue between Zenith and Nexus. We were like, why weren't there any like removal of the curses festivals in Nightbane? Because, you know, this huge thing was just happening in Lightlark that just got undone by the end of that book. And then here we have the evolution of the things that we're introducing with the Hypno Goo and Clarin, and all of these things that I thought didn't matter at all ended up coming back. And, you know, and again, they could have evolved in different ways, but I was just grinning like an idiot reading some of this. I've never been in a position with this podcast where I was like, I'm fully on board and interested and care about all of these characters. Even Andy and Dex, like, they're not super interesting, but I'm not like, I don't think they should be stricken from the book per se.
There was a part of me that went into this thinking like, okay, this is probably just going to be Zenith again. They're going to introduce a bunch of random stuff, and then the ending is going to be a cliffhanger that resolves nothing from Zenith and then adds a full book's worth of lack of closure, and then that'll just be it. There is no third one. I knew that going in, and so we'll just be mad. But no, this book actually builds on what was in the previous one, and on top of that, it builds on it in ways that I wasn't expecting at all. I would never, ever have guessed that Nor and Valen would basically be the main characters of this book.
Never.
And I wouldn't have asked for it either. I wouldn't have known to ask for it because neither of them is super interesting in the first book. But in this book, they grow into like my favorite characters easily. And they grow in ways that I didn't expect. So like ultimately the book like delivers on promises that you maybe didn't even realize at the time that it was making. Again, there are promises it doesn't deliver on, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But like this is a better book. And I'm glad that this is the way that this duology ended.
Yeah, this was the perfect send-off. This was a great duology. And I talked about it before, but the scene where Valen's being puppeteered and like quote unquote offers to sacrifice himself, I was so emotionally caught up in that. And let me tell you, if Grimm pulled out a gun in Skyshade, and at press time, Skyshade's not going to be delivered to my house for another couple days, but if in Skyshade, Grimm pulls out a gun and shoots Isla in the head, my reaction would be, well, this is going to make for some good content. But while I was reading the scene with Valen and Nor trying to like make sure that Valen doesn't get murdered, I was like, I really am invested in this character. I really don't want him to be uploaded into a satellite and murdered. And like, I just, it's been so long since I felt this way. So hats off to you, Sasha and Lindsay. I feel like there's some deep thing in here that's really working right and really an indication that you guys can write some awesome stuff and continue to ad infinitum.
Yeah, there's vision. I felt the same way when Andy and Nor were fighting. I wasn't just like, this will be a funny thing to like take the shit out of on my podcast.
No.
I was like, oh man, these characters don't actually know each other at all. This is kind of like weirdly tragic. Like one of them is the current queen of the entire universe, so she's mind controlled, and the other is legally the like military dictator of the entire universe. Right. Either of them has the power to end everything, and like maybe they could reach some kind of agreement if Darai wasn't like getting in here and like trying to mess things up. And like I wanted good things to happen for these characters. Even Nor, who's evil, I was kind of hoping like maybe there's something good coming for her because the book did such a good job of characterizing her throughout.
Right. I didn't want either of them to die.
Yeah, I didn't want either of them to die, and I was kind of sad that there wasn't a third book after finishing this one because, I don't know, I would have liked more of some of these characters. I guess the money ran out, or the first book wasn't received well enough, or maybe it was envisioned as a duology, I don't really know.
I think it was probably envisioned as a duology. There's not much left for where it could go. It did end on like one of those like, this is it moment. So, hey, Lindsay, Sasha, if you're listening, let's work on a spinoff. You thought 2 people is bad. All 4 of us will collaborate on something. I want this to keep going, damn it.
That'll definitely fix it.
Yeah, more cooks in the kitchen.
The 2 authors that originally wrote it, and then 2 assholes that like were so mean to the first one and then like tried to redeem themselves by being really nice to the second one. That's exactly what is the recipe for like a good third book in a trilogy.
Yeah, well, before we redeem ourselves too much, we do need to talk about the things that we don't like about this book. So,
boy, do we.
Without further ado.
Far across the battlefield, waiting for him, like a monster in its own right, a dark fortress, the place where his compulsion, the height of his ability, the center of everything for him and Nor, stood. Valen smiled, his first real smile in days, as he stepped over the dead, his eyes on the giant obsidianite castle that cast a shadow across this land. Here he was a king without a crown, but he didn't need one. Not in this place. Valen visualized himself wearing a cloak of deepest crimson, Nor's favorite color, as he did each time he visited the castle in his mind. In the space between one breath and the next, the cloak appeared, fabric snapping in the wind like the crack of whips that had once been used to drag him down to the depths of humanity on Lunamere, to force his compulsion to manifest if he wished to survive. Valen looked up, craning his neck toward the top of the castle, taking in each perfectly aligned black obsidianite stone. This fortress housed every mind he compelled across Mirabel, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands, all bent to his will. Home, his body hummed. For a moment, he thought he heard Nor's voice calling his name, a flicker, distant as he glanced back across the battlefield to that dark tunnel that led to their linked doorway. But the sound faded almost as soon as it began, and he carried on, dismissing it as he drew closer to his castle. It was here that Valen first tasted power, where he had first learned who he was and who he could be. He reached the castle doors, towering masterpieces made of obsidianite. A carving of the triangular soulless family crest was spread across the two doors. Valen ran his fingertips across the symbol. He could feel his power purring in response like a great beast awaiting its master's return. If Valen listened closely enough, he could hear the murmurs of those beneath his compulsion, like whispering souls wandering aimlessly through the black corridors. He took off his boots as he entered, placing them down gently on the dark stone floors. Home, Valen said.
Me when I wear my sister's favorite color in my mind palace.
Me when I complain that I don't have a crown in my mind palace, but then I'm like, I don't need one, but then I manifest other regal attire for some reason.
Oh my god. Such a dynamic there.
Like Ariadne, we've been stranded on this island of Nexus. Would you care to launch us into a more aerial view of this whole thing, where maybe we can critique it with a bit more objectivity?
Yeah, let me put some needles in your skull so we can really get ready for this. So, I talk about my fraught feelings for this book. I was struggling a lot with like the bad things about this book because I was coming up with point after point after point, and by quantity, it's probably more than I've said about a lot of books, but I was like, these are really shallow and really petty, like little CinemaSins nitpicks. But I think in and of itself that I had so many means something. So with all of these, I'm not really looking for a specific fix so much as pointing them out as like a jumping off point for possibly like more deep investigations into what might be going wrong with a story. So, Jay, I want to start this off with an apology to you specifically.
Oh.
I, as a YouTuber, need to learn to take responsibility for when my words hurt other people.
Wait, Andrew, before you apologize, do you have your ukulele on you? You're gonna need that.
I don't have my ukulele.
Okay, then I reject your apology at the outset, but I will still hear it in the interest of conversation.
The toxic gossip spaceship. I don't know. It's not funny. So, Jay, in our Zenith episode, we concluded that you were a soy lib.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
We did. We wondered aloud why there was such little diversity, both physically and in gender expression. I was like, oh, you know, talk about soyina, am I right? I rolled my eyes at you. I didn't take your point seriously, and then I moved on. But then in Nexus, there is a detail mentioned so incidentally that even though I mentioned it in our summary, I wouldn't be surprised if you and the authors that wrote this don't remember it. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't listen when you talk, so I didn't hear it.
The universe that they live in, the inhabited known universe that they lived in, is so large that even with warp technology and cryosleep, you will die before you reach one end to the other. The world is unfathomably large, and there's not like anything else going on. Like, this is the most interesting thing going on. Forget diversity for a second. Let's put your phytoestrogens away. With every plot point that comes up, whatever, like pick anything, pick literally anything that comes up in this book. There is now, because the world, the universe, I shouldn't say world, because the universe is limitless, every plot point has so much railroading that it's nuked to a comical degree by the fact that we could do anything. So let's take the Exonians let's take the Exonians trying to enter Mirabel. That was something that that didn't really sit with me right, because the options were only ever presented to us as either we enslave the universe and use them as hosts, or we let them die in their shitty dimension.
Yeah.
So are you telling me, Jay, that in this infinite universe, there's not one gas giant with unsentient jellyfish creatures that could benefit from a conscious mind, or there's not a planet near where that evil scientist with two heads lives, where like the social dynamics of a shared body are like understood and accepted, to where they could have like a shared custody situation of the body, they could like volunteer? Is there like, I don't know.
Yeah, speaking of Exodia, they could have a Yugi and Yami kind of situation where people share bodies and are like good friends with their possessors.
Sure, like it could be literally anything, because there's anything that we can do. And we've also established like there's a technological side to the universe being infinite too, because we've established on one hand that you can inject someone's consciousness into a satellite and use their psychic powers. And we've established through Alfie that there are conceivably very realistic or very convincing androids. Or not convincing, but like good androids. Why can't the twain meet and maybe we upload all the Exonians into androids, where we don't have to question like who gets put into meat sacks? Like, I did compliment this book for being cruel in presenting this binaristic approach of everyone dies in one dimension or everyone is enslaved in the other, but I would have at least liked a lampshaded explanation for why anything that I just listed could not have been brought up before, because I'm not pulling stuff out of nowhere. These are concepts established in the book.
The book sets these precedents, so it invites these questions. Like, if you can upload a guy's consciousness to a satellite, why can't you build a big supercomputer satellite that can hold the consciousnesses of like a couple 100,000 people temporarily until we figure out a more permanent solution? Like, at that point, the only reason that everybody has to be possessed is purely, I am evil and I want to possess everybody and kill them. Like, it has to be malice.
Right, and I think this was hinted. I think this was hinted that the Exonians are an inherently cruel people, which I don't love, because that's a borderline eugenicist of like a statement to make about a race of people. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, they are just evil, and that's the only thing that they wanted. I would want that beaten over my skull so that I don't have these questions. Because again, I'm only asking this because you present us with a universe that is this large.
It would be boring if, like, the Exonians were just evil, because, like, I don't know, an evil race can't be reasoned with. At that point, there's nothing to do but fight them. It kind of limits your options as a writer and as a reader. It is kind of interesting that they never even broach the possibility of, okay, not to get vegan about it, but, like, this would be weird to me, but, like, why don't they ever broach the possibility of the Exonians, like, entering, like, animal bodies or something like that?
Well, yeah.
Like, surely that would be preferable. I mean, if living formlessly in this dying galaxy or universe or whatever it is like so horrible, then surely living inside of an animal would be preferable temporarily, you know, if for some reason living inside a big supercomputer isn't an option.
Right.
And that wouldn't necessarily involve, like, overriding, like, sapient beings.
Right. And what is sapience, right? Like, I ask, hoping that Sasha and Lindsay could have injected into the plot some exploration of what it means to take over a body. And this is a separate bad thing, but it goes along with what we're talking about. There's not really a good kerchunk to the mind control thing and the fact that the Exonians are parasites. The mind control is completely coincidental because Clarin just so happened to have the compulsion ability. It makes it easier for the possession to happen, but it doesn't need to be there. So there's all of these like debates that you could have within the narrative about like, what it means to be conscious, what races or what kind of creatures would be okay to overwrite, or robots, or freaking robots. Like, literally, they just mass produce Alfies and then put all the Exonians in that. Like, that would be something.
I would adore a version of this book where they mass produce a bunch of versions of Alfie and then we watch every single one of them get killed and possessed by an Exonian. I hate that thinker. I want to see him die over and over again. No number of times could be enough. Actually, though, like it does feel at times like this, like that some of these ideas were cooked up in like a frenzy, and like I mean that in a positive way. Like like these two authors were really excited about all these disparate ideas, but they were so busy yes-anding each other and playing this game of like and then that at no point did they really stop to think like, okay, how do these disparate ideas actually affect one another? You know, if there's possession and mind control, but they're actually separate abilities that Exonians have, what does it mean that they both exist in the same world? And like, what are the consequences going to be further down the line of this plot? Or the example that you've been bringing up repeatedly, like the universe is this big, or Mirabelle is this big. What does it mean if we actually make it that big? Like, what does that make possible? And I think, as you've said, the answer is like basically everything. Like anything could be possible, at which point it kind of trivializes most things because it makes you wonder like, well, isn't there like another better solution?
Yeah, and even if it were just Andy asks exactly word for word what Jay just said, and then Clarence says no because XYZ, that's it. That's all I would need. I'm not asking for like the entire narrative to shift. You said that I said this, but I don't remember saying this in Real Life English Club. The world you are creating is making me ask questions that you don't want me to ask. And that's what we're dealing with here. Is I think this might be with spec fic just like an inherent issue where like, if you can do anything, why can't you do anything kind of deal, where either through magic or science, which is atheist magic, like why aren't these other solutions even considered? So I don't know, just what I would be proposing is like a couple exchanges of dialogue just saying, hey, no, this is our only option, and then I'd be fine. But it was weird that wasn't even done here.
It really would be as easy as Clarence saying like, no, Exonians can't possess robots because, I don't know, immaterial psychic essences are incompatible with technology, and no, Exonians can't possess animals because their minds are more evolved, and if they went into an animal body, it would make the animal's brain explode. Like,
sure.
I would be like, that's dumb, but I believe you. Sure,
right.
Why not? I don't care.
Right. There are dumber things in the real world, so I'd be okay with that.
Just having an explanation would make all the difference. So I've mentioned a couple times that like I've really enjoyed how Nor kind of becomes the main character in this book, and I think that is a net positive, but it has negative repercussions. Mainly that, Andrew, you said earlier that you wanted to go back and reread Zenith after this. The last thing I wanted to do was take another look at Zenith after reading this. Because I couldn't help but think about how shallow Nor felt in the first book compared to this. And I think that you could reread Zenith having read this and see Nor's actions as like precursors to what she's going to do in this book. But I really just think that like she would feel like nothing if I went back and reread Zenith. Like I think she would feel all the more boring knowing that like the writers were capable of writing her in such a more interesting way in the sequel.
I think we're just reaching a diversion of opinions here. I would be interested in this larval stage Nor with the context of knowing where things are going, to see, if only for my own edification more than like I'm so engaged in the plot of Zenith that I just have to experience it all one more time, more to see like, are these bizarre things that get developed, like Nor becoming the main character, are they even hinted at in Zenith? And more so than anything, I also would be interested in the Claren chapters, because I just had no interest in them in Zenith, and I didn't know what the conduit was or what the yielding was, and I still think it was a bad move to have them in Zenith. But now that I know, maybe my experience of the duology will be fuller, and I do not think that about Lightlark.
Definitely
so
not.
again, might not be an objective value measure as much as, just where I've been in terms of my literary citizenship.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to accept just like a difference of opinion there. That doesn't bother me very much. But like, I think that Nor being so interesting in the sequel reveals what a missed opportunity her character was in the first book.
Sure.
I really think that Andy should never have been the main character. Looking back, I think that Nor should have been the main character the whole time, and they should have committed to, like, this is a villain novel. Because Zenith makes this promise of, like, cool pirate romp that it never delivers on. As we harped on in our Zenith episode, the heists go off exactly to plan every single time. There's no conflict. They're not interesting at all. Why even have the pirate stuff if you're not interested in it? Instead, go full bore on Nor and just make this a cool novel about an evil lady who wants to become the queen of everything and is like kind of sulky and moody about it. I don't know. I would just much prefer that. And that just might be a subjective thing. But I do think that the series itself has revealed a deeper interest in Nor and Valen than it ever had in Dex and Andy. I mean, by the end of this book, they feel totally vestigial to me.
Right. I would go so far as to call it objective, that the level of interest placed on Andy is minuscule next to the Solaces. That is probably like one of my biggest things. And it's so metatextual because this goes into the marketing. This isn't even necessarily about the corpus of the books. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like, and we made fun of it even. It was so pervasive that we made fun of it in Zenith, even though it wasn't in Zenith either. But this is about a Marauder S and her pirate S's and the 13-year-old S's and all of these like girls going off on an adventure together. And you mentioned, interestingly enough, in the Zenith episode that they might as well be going to Taco Bell, sitting in line at the drive-thru for all the impact that they're having on the narrative. And here, they don't even have that. They are mind-controlled slaves soldiering around, marching, and every now and then we get an insight into Lyra, but they might as well have just been shot in the head. And just for all the value they add to the novel. And it's like, I don't want that, and two, I didn't really miss them in Nexus. I thought it was weird in Zenith, but I guess I was used to it by the sequel. But like, why have this level of interest in something? Was it a marketing thing? What is marauding groups of space pirate girls an easier sell than a villain novel about a complex character and her half-brother as they try to enslave the universe? I don't know.
I don't know either, and it's harder even to look back and say what the case was then when these came out. I mean, these were predecessors, as we've said a couple of times, to things like Lightlark and Powerless, so like, I don't really know what the market was like back then, but I can imagine that it would have been easier to sell the quote-unquote steamy romance, as it said on the back of my copy of Zenith, with a side of piratesses and gunneresses and pilotesses and brawleresses going around and doing heists. I feel like the villain thing is a little bit less enticing in that it's a little bit less familiar.
But I legitimately think that neither Lindsay nor Sasha gives a shit about it, because it could have been there. And I mentioned this in the summary. We had Lon, Dex, and Andy. I know these aren't our S's that we wanted so badly, but they could have done like the swashbuckling version of what they did. But no, Lon killed himself by throwing himself into an ice dragon with a grenade. And Dex and Andy never get into anything swashbuckling because they sneak around in an ice city and then go into a bar where they meet Soyina Rumbard, and then everything gets taken over by Nor by virtue of the fact that it's more interesting. So they could have swashbuckled their way into Arcadius for, the last little bit, but no, they had this very diplomatic, very almost cerebral introduction into that world, and where the A and B plots meet. Like, A plot is just so nothing that it's just been B the whole way. It's like, oh, Andy
there's
and Dex
no swashbuckling, there's no roguery. It's all just politics.
And there could have been anyone who can make me care about someone trying to hypnotize the universe into being conduits for dark shadow ghosts can make me care about swashbuckling adventures in space. I 100% unironically believe that Lindsay and Sasha don't care about it. They just put it on the marketing for whatever reason.
Lindsay, Sasha, please come on the podcast and tell us how much you care about swashbuckling and pirates legitimately. I want to know. I'm actually asking now. Did they care and it just got buried? Or, like, did they care and then they lost interest? Or did they never care? Or maybe they really did care and, like, they just, like, kind of forgot somehow.
Right.
Like, that's definitely possible as well. I would find that, like, harder to believe based on, like, how successfully they were able to execute some of the things they were interested in. But, like, I don't know, it's possible that they were legitimately interested in it at some stage of drafting and then, like, it got lost.
And I can see that happening, but it's disingenuous to put it in the marketing of the final product.
Yeah.
Let's talk about forgetting, because memory, we mentioned. What happened, do you think, to the whole memory and her relationship to Alfie, and Alfie in general getting poofed out of existence? Do you think it was something like they lost interest in it and they just wrote him out?
I keep vacillating on who was the main driver of the first book, but I think that whatever happened to Alfie and Memory ties into whoever was in charge of the first book primarily, like the actual writing of it, was replaced by whoever wrote the second book. I don't think it was the same person.
No.
Who was the leading light. And I think that just comes down to a difference of interest in those characters. And I think at some point an executive decision was made that, like, we can kind of jettison these two fools and nobody will really care. And that's exactly what happened. Like, it was an acceptable sacrifice to whoever was in charge of Nexus. That's my theory.
Right. And plot-wise, structure-wise, it worked fine. I didn't really care about them, but I only thought it was weird because there was so much weight placed on, not weight, but like screen time placed on these two robots' relationship in Zenith that I'm like, oh, weird. That's completely gone now. And like, it feels like Star Wars. It feels like in, what was it? I don't care about the Disney Star Wars, but it was like episode 9 when everyone was just like really mean to C-3PO because J.J. Abrams doesn't like C-3PO or something so weird. It was just like they just kicked him out of the whole story and wiped his memory. That's what they did to Alfie.
So they're not missed. Memory and Alfie are not missed.
No,
so in a way, like, it's an improvement to cut them. But in the same way that, for me, focusing more on Nora reveals what a shitty character she was in the first book, the positive of cutting Alfie and Memory in this book reveals that they should never have been in the series in the first place. They were totally vestigial all along. So, like, either they could have been further invested in and made into something in the first book, or they could have just been gotten rid of altogether. Because in the way that they are now, where they're kind of caught in between, where, like, they sort of matter in the first one, and in this one they just disappear, that feels wrong.
Yes.
Like, there's something very off about it to me. And especially in the case of Memory, who, again, is set up as one of, like, the principal crew members in the beginning of the first book. Like, she is one of the girls in that book. But in this book, she's like an object. She barely exists.
I have a physical copy, so I can't control F, but I would be unsurprised if the word memory with a capital M is never used in the entirety of Nexus. Can you think of any instance where they refer to her by name?
Yeah, early on they do ask her a question, if I recall right. But, like, once the ship crashes, I don't think that they refer to her anymore.
You would think Andy would mourn her.
Yeah, I would think so. Like, Andy does mourn the Marauder. There's a moment where she specifically is like, oh, it's trapped out there on the ice still, and I don't even know, like, what's gonna happen to my ship. But, like, she's not like, and also I'm worried about my friend Memory, who is sentient.
Right.
She doesn't care.
But hey, you mentioned in Zenith that this might be like Andy's a robot racist, so maybe she just doesn't care.
Maybe she is a robot racist. If so, another interesting thing worth exploring, I think.
It's completely
because it seems
gone.
like all these characters are weirdly dismissive of robots, which are, in this universe, capable of being sentient and sapient. So, like, what's the deal with that?
What's the deal with these robots?
What's the deal with these robots? Okay, I've got a little thing. Hopefully this will be something. So in all of the Andy and Dex conversations, did you notice that they either talk like they're 19 or 45? Yes. And there's no in between?
Not until you phrased it that way, but yes, they're either like bickering or like head over heels in love with each other.
Yeah, they're either bickering and reminiscing about like their good old days on the Force,
right,
or they're Marvel quipping at each other and being like, you're right behind me, aren't you? And it's like, okay, so which one are you guys? Are you in high school or are you retired? Like, make up your mind. If there's ever a moment where it feels like two different people are writing this book, it's in the contrast between those types of conversations. But like, I could also chalk that up to being just somebody not paying too close of attention to how these characters sound, and it being like the same person writing them. Mm-hmm. But like, if I had to pinpoint a moment where it feels like different people are at the reins, that would be where I would point to.
And maybe that goes into why they're so uninteresting, is because it's always so contradictory. You never know what they're going to do / neg. You never know if they're going to bicker and talk about, when we fought on that lava moon, things were so much different then. Or they're going to be making out, and then Soyina will show up, and it'll be like this awkward moment. I don't know. It's crazy how much they dropped the ball on this. We keep circling this concept. Let's put our cards on the table right now. How much did each writer contribute throughout the duology? So my personal theory, and I know already that Jay disagrees with me because we talked about this and Jay said that they disagree with me in Zenith, but my personal theory is that it started out, they were kind of collaborating on this, and in Jedi Padawan style, Lindsay, the older writer, stepped back as an advisor for Sasha, the newer writer. And I said this because I was so interested in the relatively more difficult plot devices on display with dramatic irony and contradictory, like, character motivations and the backstories informing current relationships, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, what I think happened in Nexus is Lindsay stepped back further. And I have one syntactical thing to point to really drive this point home. So Lindsay is not like super, super popular, but she's better than us. She has stuff coming out to this day. So she knows her shit, basically. So something I noticed in the prose of Nexus that for the life of me I don't remember in Zenith, please, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, is every freaking chapter at least once uses for the beginning of a clause. Like, they could not escape, for the ice dragon had grabbed the ship. It's every POV, every chapter. I think towards the end especially, it's literally every single chapter. It's crazy. And I know if you haven't read it, it's harder to understand this, but like having for to begin a dependent clause is really weird to have in a YA book. And it's only something that I think someone who doesn't know how to write in a certain tone consistently would do. And I don't remember that in Zenith, so it makes me feel that there was a pulling back here. And I think Sasha, the younger one, is maturing. I mean, she wrote an entire goddamn book. Like, of course she's maturing. She realized that, hey, Alfie sucks. Hey, the memory Alfie romance thing was weird. So she discards these weird things. And I have a whole other point about this, but like, Andy's parents don't come back up, and Jay and I both felt that those were confusing and half-baked. They don't come back up. All of these things that we have problems with get dropped, and they get dropped aggressively, but they get dropped for the betterment of the book.
I like yours a lot better. It's a lot more hopeful, and it like depicts an author in the midst of growing, like alongside a nurturing mentor, which I think is a much better story and one that I would rather believe. But like, if I had to relate to you what my gut instinct was as I was reading this, my feeling was very much that Lindsay was writing a lot of Zenith and taking it a lot less seriously. Mm-hmm. And then that when Zenith got a lot of really bad feedback, she pushed Sasha even further to the margins of like control of this story and was like buckling down and was like, no, I can fix this. and she really invested in like trying to tie up as many loose ends as she possibly could, invest in unexpected things that would interest readers, for example, making Nor and Valen more the main characters, and then just jettisoning shit that didn't work, like Alfie. That's my thought. So, like, Sasha was a minor player in this to begin with, and then got pushed even further out. So kind of the opposite of what you're suggesting. But again, I would prefer if yours was true.
Well, you said yourself, Jay, that on Lindsay's website, there's all this stuff about Zenith, New York Times bestseller, Zenith, New York Times bestseller, nothing about Nexus. So that speaks to me, at least, as a level of divorce.
You think that she wanted to distance herself from the one that didn't work, but maybe retain a little bit of fame from the one that is at least known as an entity.
Right. I'm getting a retraction vibe from Lindsay. I feel adolescent. So like, I don't know. With Zenith, it's like a little kid with her hand being held by an adult. And with Nexus, it's like, I don't need you, Mom. Here's my evil, cruel, badass mind slave. And if you don't like that, then here's this creepy SA hypno lady that you have to hang out with. So suck it. I don't know.
Yeah, I could see that. So like in an effort to save her career, she backed away further from it and just thought,
You can frame the backing away however you want. That's not necessarily... I don't know if she was necessarily ashamed of it even. Just, it was the Jedi way. I don't know. But let's talk about forgetting the parents for a second. Because I think that's weird. I even, like, again, I'm not asking for, like, any, like, actual exploration of this other than Andy being like, my parents have been mind-controlled. I have XYZ feeling about it. Like, because it was built up to be such a thing in Zenith.
I mean, I would even expect her to be like, my parents are mind controlled and I would probably like them better now because I hated them before and now they're not themselves. Like,
that's an interesting concept.
It would be kind of neat and like kind of creepy, but like in a way that I think would fit Andy if she was like, yeah, they're mind controlled, but like, I bet I would get along with them better even though they worship Nor because they're not who they were. And I hated who they were, and I don't think I could hate anybody more than that. So maybe it's an improvement.
Right, and that would add so much interest to her character and add some angst other than, oh, wow, my ex-boyfriend is my co-pilot or whatever.
Or if we're talking about like a version of this that's more swashbuckling, maybe she reconnects with her parents in some way or another. Hell, maybe they reach out to her and because she's immune, maybe it's genetic and they're immune. And so like they are trying to get in contact with her and that's an opportunity for them to reconnect. And that leads to like a more subterfuge version of them eventually making their way to Nor and Valen and having that big final fight.
And what about Lyra's mom too, the Queen of Adira? Like, did she died or no? She didn't die. Yeah, Alara. She didn't die. She was mind controlled.
Didn't she get like mind controlled in the big invasion at the end of Zenith?
Right. What happens to her?
I don't know.
Right. So she was supposed to be like this designated dream waker upper. What if again, like, she doesn't have to do much. She could. Valen's suffering under his psychic powers, and we have this cruel inversion of her being the designated nightmare waker upper is now this mind-controlled Alara is like helping Valen as he's like having this physical reaction to his psychic powers, and Valen's like, wow, that's kind of messed up.
I think that could really work. So this ties in well with something that I thought was a huge missed opportunity. And that's that, like, there's a couple moments early on where Valen's walking through his mind palace and he looks at, like, people in their obsidian prisons and he's like, yeah, those are people I have imprisoned. But, like, what if he actually talked to them? And, like, in the prison, they were their normal selves. And so they were attempting to reason with him or convince him to not mind control people. I think Alara would be a natural fit for that because she actually woke him up that one time in the first book. And we both talked about it. We were like, hey, isn't it weird that, like, she's basically his dad's coworker, and yet she's the first person that he talks to when he wakes up from his coma after being rescued from Space Azkaban. Like, what if what if he goes to her repeatedly in his mind palace and she's just her normal self in there, and she tries to like talk some sense into him, or at the very least is like some kind of moral rock for him to rely on when, for example, Nor is no longer talking to him. And she tries to keep him, I don't know, encouraged, tied to his humanity, is generally just nice to him. I think that could be good.
Right.
She could also then potentially fill the role of being the magic orb provider at the end, instead of it random being Kaylee, a character who we haven't heard of in like 500 pages, probably counting the ones in Zenith where she's not mentioned. And Alara could be like, hey, Valen, I'm going to like sacrifice my mind to you or whatever and give you the strength to reach out to Andy and free everybody, but you're going to have to die. And then he does it. And it would like, I don't know, it still wouldn't make the most sense because, like, again, what do Valen and Alara really have to do with each other? Kind of nothing. But, like, if they've built up a relationship over the course of this book, even over just, like, 2 or 3 scenes, it would be so much better than how it is now.
Right. And that was my thing about the Obsidian Palace thing, and I'm kicking myself for not mentioning it earlier because this is another thing that made it hard to sell it originally, is the people that he checks up on are random. They are just, there's a guy who's out on the ocean in Adira, but he's not anyone that we know. There's a child, and it's not anyone that we know. I know it would be contrived, so I do kind of understand why it wasn't this way, but they could have been Andy's parents. They could have been Queen Alara. They could have been anyone that, like, even, like, if Valen didn't know, would still be, like, important to us as the readers from what we know.
Even if he didn't know they were Andy's parents, there could have been descriptive clues in the narration that would have indicated to the reader that they're Andy's parents. And then at least we would have gotten that closure, and like that would have been an improvement.
That would all it takes. For all their emotional intimacy, this is kind of a small thing, very cinema-sensy, but Nor and Valen never sat down with each other and caught each other up on anything that happened in their lives. And I know this for a fact because Nor has no idea who Andy is when she's brought up. And then Valen walks in later and he's just like, oh yeah, her. I almost forgot about her. And like, hold on. So you have literally a psychic connection to your sister, and you were never like, I did XYZ thing when I was escaping with ABC person. Like, if I were Nor, I would be kind of pissed off about this because, like, you didn't tell me any of this.
Yeah, literally. Like, why didn't Valen say, like, hey, there's this lady named the Bloody Baroness, and, like, she's silly, but, like, has a weird way of actually getting away with, like, her harebrained schemes, and, like, she might be a threat to us. Like, she's unaccounted for.
Right, it's just like, I cannot buy that. There is nothing that you can tell me, Sasha and Lindsay, that would make me accept the fact that this did not come up. Nor didn't say, hey, Valen, how did you get out of Azkaban? You just showed up at each other's doorsteps one day and then picked it up from there. It's ridiculous to me.
It does feel like a mistake. And, like, that's not a thing that I would say lightly, but like I agree. I don't think there is a way to explain that. Like that just feels like a failure in the narrative. There's another one of those that I don't think there's really any explanation for. And that's the point of view being inconsistent within chapters at times. So like you mentioned with like the 4 thing being very weird, there's another quirk that pops up where like within a Dex chapter, say Dex is talking to Andy, there will be sentences that are very clearly through Andy's point of view. Or like within a Nor chapter, there will be sentences that are in Valen's point of view. And like, I don't have a problem with that, except that this book begins every chapter with like, this is who the point of view character is. Like, what's the point of doing that if it's not actually that? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess I chalk that up to like tone inconsistencies more so than anything. It is easy to lose track of it in the action, but that's another unexplainable.
It just popped up a few times, and I was like, "This is just like this should just have been caught. Like this is fixable. Right. None of this information that we're getting in Andy's point of view in a Dex chapter is like critical, but like this really shouldn't be here for the sake of, I don't know, just cleanliness."
While we're nitpicking, I did say multiple times I enjoyed the tension of the final chapters. And that is true, but there is something I wanted to talk about right when Andy kills Valen. There is someone present in the scene, Jay, that turns this sad, poignant moment into a glaring and really weird plot hole. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't think you're talking about the psychic incarnation of Orb Kaylee.
I'm not.
No, who are you thinking of?
Well, let me give you a hint. Do you think it's been 3 minutes between when the end of the story happens and Valen is sliced open with a knife?
So you're suggesting that there's a way, through the power of science, my dear, that Valen might have been, say, resurrected.
Here's what I'm saying is I'm not even asking that they do that. I'm asking that Andy ask that they do that. Because Soyina Rumbard, it has been said, other than being a bisexual with free-moving tattoos on her body, is also a torturer and is a resurrectionist with a capital R, which we all know, as anyone learns in first grade, means that if you die within 3 minutes, she can resurrect you.
Right.
So, and I'm okay.
And hold on, wait a second. She was an employee of Lunamere, right?
Right.
Which means that she technically worked for Nor?
Indirectly, yeah.
So like, shouldn't Nor be aware that there's somebody with the power of resurrection on her payroll?
One would wonder. But what I want is for Andy to say, Soyina, no, you have to resurrect Valen. And Soyina can say, I can't do that because of Valen's Exonian blood is immune to my powers. So if I were to resurrect him, it would only give him a half existence and he wouldn't be the same. I don't need it to actually happen. I need it to be brought up that you have someone who can shoot you. Literally, she can shoot you with a bullet, with a gun in the face and bring you back from the dead. Why can't she bring you back from being sliced in the throat? And if it's something stupid and it's some stupid cop-out reason, I'm okay with that. I just want me to not be the only person asking that question.
There's characters in the story that have the information necessary to ask that, and like should ask that.
Right.
Why don't they?
Why don't they?
Soyina could be like, oh yeah, I can bring him back, but like, I'm not used to working with Exonian DNA, so he won't have his mind control powers. Like, he won't be fully himself. And so, like, then he comes back, but there's a consequence.
I literally don't care. You could bring him back, you could keep him dead, you could remove his powers, you could change his personality. I just want someone else to look at the woman whose only claim to fame is being able to bring people back from the dead and say, hey, can you revive this dead guy for me? Or well, they don't get the door open for another 3 minutes. So then Soyina can be like, sorry, it's been 3 minutes and 5 seconds. I don't care. I just need it to come up.
Well, it's not her only claim to fame, Andrew, because as you may recall, she is in fact bisexual.
She is bisexual.
Which I think is noteworthy.
She's had male and female lovers. Speaking of Soyina, this warrants even less of a discussion than the other stuff I was saying, but I did also think, so when they run into Soyina in the ice bar before they join up with the underground, they being Dex and Andy, they're like, oh, it's you. I haven't seen you since you betrayed us. And, like, did she? Like, I'm completely ready for me to have just missed something, but you talked to the prison guard who can bring people back to life and torture people and like, hey, get us out of the space station on a death ship. And you're surprised that she shot you and brought you back to life. I don't know. Like, I don't understand what Soyina did wrong in Zenith. I could be like misremembering something.
I mean, she wasn't pleasant, but I feel like she made the most strategic decisions.
Right, given the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, she did what she was requested to do.
Right. So I just don't understand why they were so, like, angry at her.
So, I know I kind of already said this during our summary, but for me, like, the Tan flashback was, like, just too little too late, and it revealed to me that this is something that our authors have thought a lot about. Like, I have a very strong hunch that the scene that we got between Nor and San was not like their only one that they wrote. I feel like it's just one that they picked because they thought it was particularly strong, and it was a pretty good scene. But it made me think that like there was room for more of this throughout. Like there could have been more scenes between San and Nor to establish that they have this relationship, rather than trying to like in retrospect convince us like no, trust me guys, like look, they've been like in love the whole time. Like I don't know, you could have been spacing that out. There was so much junk in Zenith that I feel like could have been cut, and like one of the things that could have been put in its place was scenes between Nor and San, like developing their relationship so that when he dies it actually feels like it means something. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you mean. It's just so vestigial, and I don't know why San is even there other than to contrive this like excuse for a rift between Nor and Valen. It feels like 2 books were spent just for this one plot point, because I can't tell you anything about San. He likes Nor, he loves her, he makes weird sex jokes, and then he got shot and died.
He has an inexplicably German name that draws into question like the orthography of every single character in this book. How is there a San and an Adonis that are from the same planet? Right. But whatever.
No, I literally like, I don't know. I think something was so missed. You almost should have written him off too, and had some other reason for like Nor and Valen to steadily grow apart.
Yeah, like I'm glad he dies for that reason, but like did he have to be? Maybe it would be more efficient to not set him up at all and just get rid of him and find another way for them to have a falling out.
This is kind of a sweeping thing and it's very vague, but I did kind of want to ask you like how genuine you think the emotional core of this book was when we get caught up in these conflicts and the fraught dramas and the tension. How much of this do you actually feel like you're reacting to what's in the story? I have a reason I'm asking this, but I kind of want to just get your answer on that.
How much am I reacting to the story as opposed to what? Like, what else could I be reacting to?
Well, so therein kind of lies the problem. It's just like this series wears its inspiration on its sleeves, like so openly, with all your Star Wars, Firefly, even Dune with all the stuff about nukes. I wonder how much of that is endemic to the Androma saga.
I have not seen Dune or Firefly. I have seen Star Wars, and there were moments between Androma and Dex where I felt like they were really trying to do a Han and Leia thing, like an I love you, I know kind of dynamic. And so like in those moments, I was mostly thinking like, oh yeah, they're definitely trying to do that and it's not working. The things that I was more interested in were the things where I didn't feel like it was aping something else. So like all of the Valen and Nor stuff, I feel like there's not a lot of books that I have read that have like a villain brother-sister dynamic at the core. And I know that's like a very specific thing. Right. So like, of course, how many could there be that there are like that? Right. But nonetheless, it is unique. And so I was drawn to it. But I feel like you're thrusting in like a different direction. So I'm going to stop talking so I can hear what your point was.
Well, I'm just, like I said, I'm really still trying to process my ultimate feelings about this book. And I was doing like some soul searching about why I was reacting to certain scenes in certain ways. And I remember like really reacting to when Andy is trying to save Valen and by process Nor from Darai. And I remember like feeling like this very core like twinge of emotion, and I kind of pulled at that thread, and I realized that my brain wasn't reacting to the drama of the scene being presented. I was looking at the image of a creepy old man forcing people to fight, and I was transposing it on my feelings of watching Return of the Jedi when I was 7, when I was both sad that the Star Wars movies my dad was showing me were coming to an end, and I was struck with the image of a son beating the shit out of his dad and then dragging his dying body around, and then looking to my dad and being like, oh wow, this is a lot for my 7-year-old mind to process. And ironically, like someone coming out of a compulsion, it made me wonder how much of my experience with this book was me being compelled to feel a certain way by jangling keys in front of my head that looked like other keys that I liked.
Because it does wear its inspiration on its sleeve, I feel like maybe it's like a very deliberate aim of the book to remind you of things that you like and hope that you will like this in kind. I mean, this is definitely not the only book that's tried to sell itself on like a all-girls cast of badasses doing cool girl fight things together. Obviously, the thing I'm about to reference came out later than Zenith and Nexus, but like Birds of Prey is something that's trying to do that exact same thing. And I don't think that like that necessarily detracts from this book as like a work of art, like if it is deliberately iterating on ideas that it has seen succeed and that it has like a deep love for, I don't think that that is something that necessarily like is a point of detraction from like the quality of the work. I think that like when it fails, it's because it either doesn't understand why the things that it liked succeeded, or because it tries too deliberately to like cling to those moments. I did like the Andy and Nor fight, like I said earlier, but I think the reason it doesn't work in the same way that like the Luke and Vader fight works is because Andy and Nor don't know each other. Like, they have nothing to do with each other, and the Darai, who's like the Palpatine in this situation, only has a connection to one of those characters, being Nor. And like Nor and Darai do have kind of a Palpatine Vader connection, but then Andy just like has nothing to do with this at all. If it was Valen and Nor fighting and Darai in the background, that would be a totally different thing, and that would be like similar enough to Star Wars, but also different enough that I think it would work. But I think that like the way that it is doesn't click because I'm kind of talking in circles now, but because it doesn't understand like the dynamics at play in Star Wars that made it so effective. It's just kind of like trying to arrange the pieces in the same array without like understanding how they necessarily got there.
Right. And I'm more talking like out of a form of paranoia than anything. I have very little to back this up, but me being able to expose that artifice in the storytelling did kind of make me question from the ground up the fact that I think this is the best English Club podcast book that we've ever read. And I'm like, did I fall for a magic trick? Is my brain full of goo? I don't know. And I guess that's not an interesting question even to explore too much, because probably everyone's brain is full of goo to an extent, and we just have to choose at what point we start to accept it as reality.
All of our brains are full of goo, and there is no God. It's all just science, which is atheist magic, as Soyina taught us. At the end of the day, that's all we have.
Take that, Tim and K. Marie. There's no dinosaurs in hell, because there is no hell, and everyone can speak Japanese no matter what.
Anyone can speak Japanese if you put your mind to it. If you take nothing else away from this episode, take that
That's
away.
What
We're
Zenith
not
is
in
all
hell. And you're free to learn Japanese at your discretion.
Sorry to the Order of the Orpox for the jump cuts that are going to come, but this is so long. It's like 4 pages of her just talking.
It's a sermon.
So only some of this is important, yeah.
And that means Nor and Valen.
Dex trailed off, mistrust in his eyes.
They're from Ixonia too?
Their blood is half Ixonian, yes, Clarence said. That is how they inherited the compulsion ability I once had. But even at my full strength, my power was weaker than theirs. Before Cyprian Cordus cast me out, I was able to pass a message to my daughter, Nor, through a mental bond we shared. I told her about her true lineage, and that she had a brother. And I told her that Ixonia was in need of a savior like her, to allow them entry. Exonia is a dying world. I came here long ago in hopes of becoming that savior, and yet when I came to Mirabel, I fell in love. This is a world of purest light, so different from the vast Exonian darkness I had always known. In this world you have bodies, you have freedom. The Exonians are not so blessed. Instead, we have abilities gifted from the god stars themselves. A few of us, called the Yielded, were once the strongest of our kind. We were given bodies, ones that took centuries to create, so that we could make the journey to Mirabel and find a way for our people to someday join us here. There's a small doorway in the void, a tiny tear that allows us entrance. When I first arrived on Mirabel, I managed to compel my way into the heart of the Zenitharian king. Adonis was a good man, kind. I couldn't help falling in love with him, and because he loved his planet so deeply, I grew to love Zenithara too, to love all of Mirabel. And then her eyes softened, turned wistful. I got pregnant with Nor, and I loved her above everything else. In my happiness, I began to forget my mission. I lost myself in the life I'd made here. But as everyone knows, the full might of Arcadius eventually came to Zenithara. The war was bloody and brutal. Our people were dying by the thousands. So I gave myself over to Cyprian in order to save them, to save Nor. With the aid of my compulsion, he agreed to a ceasefire. But I never saw my husband or my daughter again. I left Nor in the care of Durai so that she might someday learn the truth about herself and her abilities. During my time on Arcadius, I compelled Cyprian to love me. To this day, I find myself wondering whether my control over him was ever real or if he was always seething below the surface of my compulsion, desperate to break free and end my life. Still, I became pregnant with his child during those years I spent on Arcadius. Valen, Andy said, as if the realization hit her fully. It goes on from there, but you get the idea. She's an extra-dimensional being and did the hypno essay twice. Not only the once that we thought she did, but twice. So that's good.
Oh man, go to therapy, girl.
Literally.
Go to extra-dimensional space therapy. All right, Andrew. That was all of the things that we felt like weren't working so well in Nexus, alongside some suggestions. But in the effort of trying to keep to our usual format, the thing that we have up nextus is our critiques, our things that we might change. Would you like to lead us off with some suggestions?
Kill Lyra. For real. So you will recall in the summary or one of our stupid sections, I don't remember which anymore, you'll recall that I mentioned that when Clarin revealed herself to Andy and Dex and was like, be on my side, I started out as being like, hey, this is really weird. I don't like this. And then I went to, hey, this is really weird. You're demanding a lot, and this is pretty like gutsy of you to attempt. I had the exact same response when Nor is trying to get Andy's attention, so she quote unquote kills Lyra. Of course, it's obvious right up front that it's a fake out, but they did the did she didn't she thing long enough to where I started second guessing myself, and I was like, holy crap, did they kill Lyra? And then I was like, wait, if they killed Lyra, that is brutal, because Lon died to save her, only for her to willingly, quote unquote, sacrifice herself for like the plot to develop. This is cruel. This is a horrible, horrible thing to do. And then I was like, wow, that would be pretty badass of them to do. like talk about like pulp sci-fi that gives me nightmares and childhood traumas, like with Empire Strikes Back. This could be like the Transformers movie 1986, where it's just a complete bloodbath, this cynical thing where you just kill off the entire main cast so that you can sell new toys, and you never know what's going to happen because it just depends on whichever toy is being cycled out of the factory. Kind of like how we wantonly dismissed Memory and Alfie and Havoc and all these other characters that we just loved so much. I think it would be...
They weren't selling, so we had to get rid of them.
I don't think this is like the final thing, but like make a copy of the Word doc, write a scene or a couple scenes in which Lyra actually fucking dies, and see where that brings your narrative.
That's a bold suggestion. I like it. I can get behind it. I think that similarly, I would like to see a version of this where Memory stays. I'm, again, fine with Alfie dying. I'd like to see Alfie die on screen a million different ways. Actually, that's a suggestion in its own right. But I would like to see a version of this where you challenge yourself to like keep Memory in some kind of way. Maybe as the ice dragon is attacking, Andy is like, oh my god, Memory's consciousness is still on the wrecked Marauder. We have to get it off. We can't just let it freeze out here in the cold. And so like she rushes in to upload Memory into her Apple Watch that's embedded in her wrist and is also a flashlight. And then Memory and Alfie can be together inside of her ARM computer or something. Right. Something that could add some additional tension to the scene. And as I recall, Andy wasn't really doing that much during the dragon fight anyway. So, like, you might as well.
You might as well. That would actually be pretty cool, because like you could have the same like robot assisted navigation that they had when they were looking for the bar, but instead of Alfie, it's Memory. And then every now and then, like your demented uncle on FaceTime, he shows up and he's like, oh, did you know a speakeasy is not technically a bar? And then Memory is like, anyways, check out this place next. I'm the good computer. And you have your cake and you eat it too. And you don't have to completely remove someone from the story. You can have everything.
That would also be funnier, because like it wouldn't just be a waste of time. Like it would be a little bit of buddy comedy, and it would progress the plot. It wouldn't just be like Alfie being so stupid that it delays their progress for literally no reason.
Right. I think we mentioned already that we should merge Candice. What's her freaking name? I gotta go back to my summary. These characters don't matter. Clarissa. We should merge Clarissa and Aaron into a completely new character called Clarissa, because I don't like Aaron. Aaron is not funny. She turns things invisible. That should have gone in our bad section. Is like, what do you mean you can just like make things invisible by touching them? They should round you up and kidnap you to like harness your power and use you as like organic cloaking devices. It's crazy to me that they just drop this like it's nothing.
Yeah, like if what's the two-headed scientist's name?
Ecclesia. If
Ecclesia can harvest Valen's DNA and turn it into a virus, blah 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 blah, then certainly there's other scientists who could harvest Aaron's DNA and craft from that tinctures that make people temporarily invisible. Or hell, there's probably people that cut off their skin and create skin gloves that make you invisible, a la Lightlark's. No, wait, was that Lightlark? Was that Lightlark, or was that?
It was Lightlark. It was Lightlark.
Yeah, a la Lightlark's magic skin gloves. Like, right? Like, if it's her skin that makes things invisible, like, wouldn't there be a trade of that or something? I don't know.
You would think. But this world is so big. This world is so ginormously immense that you can't help but ask yourself these questions. And I know you guys don't want to answer these questions because these are stupid questions. I don't care about skinning people alive so that we can get a skin glove that makes you invisible. But you insisted on showing us this invisible lady. You were like, hey, here's this person who actually matters to the narrative. She's going to get eaten by a dragon. Here's the most unfunny, annoying piece of shit in the world, and you have to deal with her. And I'm like, why? Why? Why did you do this?
Why?
It feels cruel. It feels mean.
Yeah, did they think... I don't know. I have a hard time believing that they really thought they were being funny with Aaron, because, like, these are jokes that, like, nobody thinks are funny. These are jokes that, like, you put in as, like, filler for better jokes that you replace them with later. Like, everybody's heard this kind of humor a million times before, even back when this came out, like, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever. Like, this is nothing. We all know this is nothing.
I don't know. I think they did kind of want it to be funny. Or kill Aaron. Kill both of them. Either merge them or kill both of them. I don't care.
Merge them and kill both of them, actually. Ooh, okay, wait. Here's like a fake suggestion that would be cool. I want like a spin-off that branches the timeline at the dragon fight. So in this timeline, we've merged Aaron and Clarissa, and Clarissa has Aaron's invisibility powers. So where the timeline diverges is she gets eaten by the dragon, but the dragon absorbs her invisibility powers. So then we have an invisible ice dragon running around that's like fucking up everything for everybody. So the story becomes about trying to fight off invisible ice dragons instead of psychic satellites that mind control the entire universe, and that we have to nuke a black hole to get ghosts out of. Thoughts on this?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying, make a separate copy of this and try to experiment with this like weirder, meaner shit. I don't know. I don't know if that would turn into anything, what Jay's suggesting, but it's worth looking into. Better than now you see me, now you don't. Kill Havoc. That's an easy one.
Don't kill Havoc.
I'm tired. That stupid cat.
Don't kill Havoc.
Well,
just don't put him in the book in the first place.
Right.
He shouldn't even have been in Zenith.
He could find maybe his species is actually native to Solera, and he finds his people or his cats, and he returns to his cat colony, and he's happily ever after. And Gilly understands, and she learns to let go of the things she loves. And you have this happy moment.
I also think that the titles of the books should be swapped. I keep wanting to call Nexus Zenith and Zenith Nexus, because Nexus just feels like an idea. It's a bunch of like things converging, which is kind of what happens at the beginning. There's a bunch of there's a confluence of random geopolitical. Well, it's not really geopolitical. It's like
astropolitical,
intergalactic. That's really good. It's astropolitical or galactopolitical. It's like a bunch of random shit that happens that leads to more random shit. Whereas Zenith literally is like, it's like a peak. It's like an inflection point. That feels like it should be the one that ends the series. Like, it's confusing that Zenith comes before Nexus. Zenith feels so much more momentous than Nexus does.
Right. Yeah, and again, like Zenith doesn't make sense for Goo, it doesn't make sense that Nexus is the name for a satellite.
It kind of makes sense that Nexus would be like what you would call the project where like everybody's mind intersects in Valen's mind, but you could easily call it Zenith as well, because in that framework of things, Valen's mind becomes the zenith of all minds, because it contains all minds.
Sure.
And then I don't know, you could still call the Goo Nexus or whatever. I don't give a shit. I just think that Zenith should be the one that ends the series because it sounds more momentous.
No, I agree. I don't like the nomenclature at all. But since we're talking about nomenclature, it reminded me of our episode where we use that as a springboard into the religion, which we have to talk about because like the universe is way too big to make sense, the God stars they've jumped the shark. I thought it was weird at first that giants, blue people, and humans alike all worshipped the exact same gods the exact same way, but I think it's even weirder that the extra-dimensional race full of evil shadow energy beings also worships the God stars by the name that they are given, and likes them even better, one might say, than the people who are already known to be worshiping them. So what this says to me is like, So the God Stars are just real. Like, they are just real things that are real. It's not like religion in our world where it is by definition metaphysical. You can go up to a God Star because that's the only explanation for why every constituent part of the reality that we live in worships them.
Yeah, they've got to be real.
Okay. I just... One, that's stupid. Two, I think they should even, like, there should at least be some not misinterpretation, but there should be some difference of interpretations between groups. Like, maybe the God Star of Hope to Dex is the God Star of Death to Valen. I don't care. It's just like, I don't know. It does feel like you're jumping the shark or just really, like, smoothing out something that should be a lot more textured.
I have two thoughts about this. One is that I like this idea conceptually because it flies in the face of religion as we understand it, in that, like you're saying, it smooths over all the differences of interpretation and just says, like, hey, this is just true and everyone just accepts it, right. Which is confusing as a person that comes from Earth in the year 2024. And I think that confusion is something that could be explored, but that the book is not interested in exploring, but I wish that it were. That's thought one. Thought two is, let's imagine a version of this book where it's not so smoothed over. That makes me think there is the beginnings of that in that Lyra and Lon's religion is, like, kind of different. They allude to, like, this kind of animism and, like, ancestor worship that makes me think that, like, it's syncretistic with the God Stars, but it's not the same. So I feel like an expansion of that where either they reject certain parts of God Star worship and accept others, or they reject it outright, could create some avenues that make this feel more like the way we know religion to actually work. Where some people like combine parts of extant religions or come up with their own, or just come from, like, you know, a culture that, like, rejects dominant religion altogether. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, no, like, we worship the God Stars by throwing around glowing flowers when people die. And then Breck says, we worship the God Stars by ritualistic combat and sacrifice. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't like that the God Stars are 100% definitely real and worshipped across dimensions. But if you had to do it, I still think our original point stands that there needs to be diversity, if for nothing else than the interest in the world.
Yeah, if we have these, like, different alien races that have really different cultures, it only follows that they would worship the God Stars in different ways, even if they all agreed fundamentally that they are real and that there are this number of real ones. Like, surely they would just celebrate them differently because they live in different places. Because they come from different planets where there's different materials available. So, like, a planet that doesn't have glowing flowers wouldn't worship the God Stars with glowing flowers. Like, it sounds dumb to lay it out like this, but it's something that I don't think that the book ever thought about even a little.
No, not a little bit.
Jutting out from the panels overhead were massive tubes flowing with what looked like liquid starlight, the Zenith virus, full of Valen's DNA, full of his compulsion power that Ecclesia had so flawlessly replicated. He followed those tubes with his eyes, numb to the horror of what was to come. They trailed from the walls like the very veins of the satellite, twisting until they formed one thick cord that led down to the center of the space, where a metal pod, much like the med bay healing pods he'd seen on starships, sat waiting. The pod door stood ajar, a light inside revealing the throne Dorai had spoken of. It would be his prison for all eternity, a coffin that would never be buried beneath the ground, but instead cast out into the stars. Beside the pod stood a panel on a thin podium. The soldiers guided Androma over to it, flanking her on all sides. She didn't resist, almost as if she were being compelled by a power similar to the one commanding Valen now, but he knew she was immune to the virus, had known it since Dex resisted the attack on Eucatoria. Perhaps it was her own resolve driving her to follow Dorai, for Valen knew she did not fear death. He'd seen her find her way out of worse situations before. "A nice fit," Ecclesia said, grinning down at Valen as she stepped past Nor and began to work on the pod, fingertips flying across the network of glowing panels inside to begin the process. The pod hummed to life as straps snaked tight across his chest, closing over his wrists, his ankles. "There will be pain," Ecclesia's right head said somewhat apologetically as she tapped in a command. "Oh yes," the other head said. though it's best not to scream or fight it. It struck Valen then what he'd done to the entirety of Mirabelle. He wondered if they'd felt any pain, the very same pain he felt now when he'd stolen their minds. He wondered if they had gone down fighting as he was, or if they'd simply ceased to exist. The Godstars had seen his sins, and now they were punishing him for them. "You'll be executed publicly when this is done," Darai said to Nor as he stepped back and watched Ecclesia work, arms crossed over his chest. "Valen will be launched into the sky, his compulsion sending out the message that I am now king. They will worship me, and me alone." Initiating the first sequence, Ecclesia said. The first needle began to slide into Valen's skull.
I really liked that whole part. I know it was like silly, but like there was a lot of like genuine tension in that, in like pretty much the last 25%. I was like, wow, man, this matters.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was like, obviously knowing what kind of book this is, like it's all going to turn out fine. Right. So like some of the tension was negated, but I was like, oh, Valen seems like a real person and character now in a way he did not in the first book. Like he has remorse, he has complicated feelings.
Right. Now that we're kind of at the end of our good, bad, and suggestions, again, I think by quantity we have talked a lot more about the negatives than the positives, but it's just because there are all of these like tiny holes. Like it's this superstructure riddled with cracks that we're trying to fix here. But I am so happy. I'm so proud of Lindsay and Sasha for being able to take the story in a weird new direction and really net themselves some interesting plot points out of it. I would take a million ice dragons for the depth and interest that we got from Nor and Valen navigating their new social dynamic. I think it all came together for something that is a cohesive whole, a work of literature. I mean, it's not perfect, it's not amazing, but I'd rather read this than Lightlark, so, or Fourth Wing, if, you know, a lot of people don't like Lightlark, but people like Fourth Wing.
Oh yeah, I would much rather read this, and I will give my full-throated endorsement as well. This is a book that surprised me in ways that made me excited to keep reading, which is something that hasn't happened on the show before. This is a book that had the courage to like drop parts of its prequel that weren't working and just like keep going. Like it kept trucking. And again, that does lead to gaps in like the scaffolding of the series as a whole. Like if you look back, there are definitely things that don't make sense, that feel incomplete, but they push through to the end. It has a conclusion. It's done. It's a unit. And it can be appreciated as a complete unit that does come to something and has enjoyable moments along the way.
And I don't know, maybe it's just more a reflection of us that this is our bar, but I think we need to celebrate these things. It would be hypocritical of us to gloss over the achievements here, since this is what we have been begging for from all of our authors. I've been picking on Alex Astor a lot because I don't like Lightlark at all. But for any authors, I would say like this is what we have been begging for. So I feel validated. Things could have been better, but things could have been so much worse.
No, I mean, this is literally what we're always saying we want. Like, how fucking disingenuous would it be if we were like, this is good, but it also sucks. Like,
right.
I don't know, like, this is exactly what we want, is a book that, like, shows that, like, improvement is possible within a series. Lightlark has not been giving us that. We haven't read Iron Flame, but I'm, like, 100% sure that it wouldn't give us that.
I'm positive.
The Johnstones have written 12 squillion books, and none of them are any better than the others. Rich Shapiro has written the same book a billion times with, like, virtually no improvement across, at least not that I've seen. Like, I don't know, this is what we would like to see in an ideal scenario. Like, authors that commit to their premise, that make tough choices when the first book had big issues about which issues are going to remain and which ones they're going to make an effort to fix, and they still, like, finish the dang thing, you know?
Right. Yeah, it is done. There's nowhere for the story to go /pause. And we've completed a series, even if it's just a duology. Hopefully Skyshade will be the last in the series, but I know that's not true in my heart. But until that moment...
Even if it's not, we still can read the other 2 Noah books and get a trilogy under our belts that way.
Jesus Christ. Oh, yeah, so there's a lot to look forward to, but I think we'll call it a night here. Let's go ahead and pack it up. Lindsay and Sasha, thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad you thought that SBU was the place to get critique and feedback, but this is it. The ship's blasting off.
It's been a pleasure to have you. And as the club door closes like 2 metal hands closing over the visage of a glass spaceship, we want to remind you that you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at SBU_English Club, that you can find our website at EnglishClubPodcast.com, that you can support us by liking and subscribing this video on YouTube, by subscribing in any other way on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast version of this on, and that if you feel so inclined, you can toss us a couple bucks over on Ko-Fi or on PayPal. That helps us bribe the janitors to let us stay late every night. We're so delighted to have had you join us for a club meeting tonight.
Awesome. So I guess we will see you guys around campus. See you next time for Skyshade.
Oh boy.
Andy had made a name for herself in this galaxy by pirating goods and living outside the law. But maybe it was time to switch sides. Not entirely, of course, for she'd given up her general status, handing it over to the one person who terrified her the most. Soyina. The new general had done well. In the months after the attack, she'd rebuilt the capital city and turned Arcardius back into its military state, while Dex and Andy had helped to appoint leaders across the other planetary systems. Soyina, much to her credit, made a strangely refreshing general, albeit a terrifying one. And now, Andy was free. She knew she was meant for other things, and while the darkness in her was great, she'd at least decided to use it for good. The end. That's not the end. They talk for a little bit longer than that, but oh my god. I gave absolute military power to a torturer.
I'm
Awesome.
so glad that the status quo, parentheses, military dictatorship, was restored.
I didn't even notice that the first time, but like they literally said she restored the fascist dictatorship. And now everyone's happy.